The scandal didn't break at the ball. It broke 3 days later, when Eleanor Ashford walked out of her family's estate with nothing but a travel cloak and a single trunk, heading toward the most dangerous border territory in England, alone. The whispers had already started. She rejected both of them. But that wasn't the full truth. What society didn't know, what they couldn't comprehend, was that she hadn't rejected anyone. She'd demanded something no woman of her station had ever dared ask for, proof that love could survive outside the gilded cage they all called civilization. If you want to see how a duchess brought an empire to its knees, stay until the end. Drop a comment with your city below, and don't forget to hit that like button. The Ashford drawing room smelled like imported roses and expensive disappointment. Eleanor stood by the window, one hand resting on the velvet curtains, watching the London rain turn the street below into a river of gray. Behind her, her mother's voice carved through the afternoon like a dull knife. "You cannot keep doing this, Eleanor." "Doing what, Mother?" Eleanor didn't turn around. She'd learned that trick years ago, how to sound engaged while being completely elsewhere. You know precisely what. Lady Ashford's teacup clinked against its saucer with aristocratic violence. "Lord Pembroke was the third suitor you've dismissed this month." "The third? People are beginning to talk. People are always talking. It's the only exercise most of them get. This is not amusing." Eleanor finally turned. Her mother sat rigid in her chair, spine straight as a monument, wearing the expression she reserved for servants who'd broken something valuable. Eleanor had seen that look her entire life. She'd stopped flinching at it around age 12. "I didn't say it was amusing, Mother. I said it was inevitable." Eleanor moved away from the window, her pale blue dress whispering across the carpet. "Lord Pembroke spent 20 minutes explaining his hunting trophies. 20 minutes! I now know more about taxidermy than any human should. He has an income of $12,000 a year. He also has the conversational depth of a decorative plate." Lady Ashford's jaw tightened. "Your father married you because grandfather told him to, and you've both been professionally miserable ever since. Forgive me if I don't find that inspiring." The slap didn't come. It never did. Lady Ashford didn't believe in physical discipline. Emotional distance was so much more effective. "You're 23 years old," her mother said, each word precise as a surgery. "In 2 years, you will be unmarriageable. In 5, you will be a curiosity. In 10, a burden. How comforting that you've planned my decline so thoroughly. I'm trying to protect you." "No." Eleanor's voice went quiet. Not soft, quiet. There was a difference. "You're trying to dispose of me in the most socially acceptable way possible. There's a difference." Before Lady Ashford could respond, the door opened. The butler stepped in, silver tray in hand, wearing the expression of a man who'd interrupted family warfare and knew it. "Miss Eleanor, a card." Eleanor took it. Heavy stock, expensive ink, no decoration except a single embossed initial, B. Her mother leaned forward. "Who?" "The Duke of Blackmoor." The silence that followed had weight to it. Lady Ashford set down her teacup very carefully. "The Duke has sent you a card?" "Apparently." "What does it say?" Eleanor turned it over. On the back, in handwriting that looked like it had been carved rather than written, "Tomorrow. The gallery at Whitmore House. 3 o'clock. Not a question. Not an invitation. A statement. "He wants to meet," Eleanor said. Her mother's face did something complicated. Hope, calculation, and fear all fighting for the same real estate. "You'll go, of course." "Will I?" "Eleanor." Lady Ashford actually stood up, which she almost never did during these conversations. "Adrian Blackmoor is the most powerful unmarried man in England. He owns half of Yorkshire, has the ear of the Prime Minister, and hasn't shown interest in a woman since—" She stopped. "Since his father died and he inherited the title at 19, Eleanor finished. "I know the story, Mother. Everyone knows the story. The boy who became a duke overnight and turned into ice." "He's not ice. He's careful. There's a difference." Eleanor looked at the card again. The bee caught the light, seemed almost to move. She'd seen the Duke, of course. Everyone had. At parties, at the theater, at those excruciating society dinners where people pretended to enjoy each other's company. He stood out the way a wolf stands out in a room full of dogs. Same basic shape, entirely different animal. Adrian Blackmoor didn't smile, didn't dance, didn't engage in the performative courtship that passed for romance among their class. He watched, he listened. And when he spoke, people shut up and paid attention, because the Duke didn't waste words. He'd been watching Eleanor for months. She knew because she'd been watching back. "I'll think about it," Eleanor said. "You'll think—" Lady Ashford looked like she might actually shout, which would have been unprecedented. "This is the Duke of Blackmoor." "Yes, Mother. I'm aware of his title. I'm less clear on why that should make me jump when he says jump." She left before her mother could respond, climbing the stairs to her room with the card still in her hand. Once inside, door locked, she sat on the edge of her bed and stared at it. Tomorrow. The gallery at Whitmore House, 3 o'clock, 7 months. That's how long Adrian Blackmoor had been watching her. 7 months of brief glances across ballrooms, of careful distance at dinner parties, of absolutely nothing that would qualify as courtship. And now this. Eleanor stood, walked to her desk, and pulled out a piece of paper. Her handwriting was smaller than his, more fluid, but just as direct. "I'll be there. Don't waste my time." She sealed it, rang for a servant, and sent it before she could second-guess herself. Then she sat back down and wondered what the hell she'd just agreed to. Samk. The next afternoon arrived with the kind of gray London sky that made everything look like a watercolor left out in the rain. Eleanor dressed carefully, not for seduction, but for war. A deep green dress that made her look older, sharper. Hair pinned up tight. No jewelry except her mother's pearl earrings, which she wore purely out of spite. The carriage ride to Whitmore House took 20 minutes. She spent it not thinking about the Duke, which meant she thought about nothing else. The gallery was on the 3rd floor, accessible by a marble staircase that echoed with every step. Eleanor climbed it slowly, her heart doing something complicated in her chest that felt dangerously close to actual nervousness. The gallery itself was exactly what you'd expect from old aristocracy. Long, windowed on one side, lined with portraits of dead people on the other. Empty except for one man standing at the far end, hands behind his back, looking at a painting of some grim-faced ancestor. Adrian Blackmoor didn't turn when she entered, didn't acknowledge her at all for almost 30 seconds, which would have been rude from anyone else. From him, it was just expected. "You came," he said finally. His voice was lower than she remembered, rougher around the edges. "You commanded. Aren't I supposed to?" Now he turned. Eleanor had seen handsome men before. London was full of them, pretty boys with pretty manners who knew how to smile and say nothing. Adrian Blackmoor wasn't that. He was tall, dark-haired, built like someone who actually used his body for something other than dancing. His face was all angles and shadows, the kind of face that looked severe even when relaxed. And his eyes were the color of smoke and just as hard to read. "That's not an answer," he said. "Neither was your card. Tomorrow, 3 o'clock. Not exactly a sonnet, Your Grace." Something that might have been amusement flickered across his face. Might have been. It was gone too fast to tell. "I don't write sonnets." Clearly. He studied her for a moment, the silence stretching out like a bridge between them. Eleanor forced herself not to fidget, not to look away. She'd learned young that the first person to flinch always lost. "You're not what I expected," Adrian said. "What did you expect?" "Someone easier to read." "How disappointing for you." This time she was sure. He almost smiled. "Not disappointing, inconvenient. I'll try to be more transparent in the future." "Please don't." He moved then, crossing the gallery toward her with the kind of controlled movement that suggested violence was always an option, just never the first choice. When he stopped, he was close enough that she could smell wood smoke and something else. Leather, maybe, or just cold air. "I've been watching you," he said. "I noticed. For 7 months. I can count, Your Grace." "Adrian." Eleanor blinked. "What?" "My name is Adrian. Use it." That would be highly improper. So is meeting me alone in an empty gallery. We're past propriety. He had a point. Eleanor tried not to let it show that he'd just knocked her slightly off balance. "Fine. Adrian, why have you been watching me for 7 months without saying a word?" Because I needed to be sure. Of what? That you were worth the disruption. Eleanor laughed. She couldn't help it. The sheer arrogance of the statement was almost refreshing. The disruption. What am I disrupting exactly? Everything. Adrian didn't say it like a joke. He said it like a diagnosis. My life is structured, predictable. I run estates, manage investments, advise the government. I don't have time for... He stopped. For what? Women? Love? Anything resembling a human emotion? His jaw tightened. For uncertainty. And I'm uncertain. You're a variable I can't control. I don't like variables. Eleanor crossed her arms. Then why am I here? Adrian was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice had changed, still controlled, but with something underneath it, like pressure building in a sealed room. Because 7 months of watching you has convinced me that I'd rather have the variable than the control. It should have sounded romantic. It didn't. It sounded like someone admitting to a weakness they resented. That's possibly the least charming declaration I've ever heard, Eleanor said. I'm not charming. I noticed that too. But I am honest. He took a half step closer. Not touching, but close enough that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. I don't play games. I don't make promises I can't keep. If I pursue you, it's because I intend to marry you. If I marry you, it's because I intend to build a life with you, not around you, with you. That's not romance. That's partnership. Eleanor's heart was doing that complicated thing again. You haven't even courted me yet and you're already talking about marriage? Would you prefer I lie about my intentions? I prefer you have a conversation with me before planning our entire future. Something in Adrian's expression shifted. Not softening, he didn't seem capable of softening, but adjusting. Like he'd just realized he'd miscalculated. You're right, he said. I'm approaching this wrong. You're approaching this like a business acquisition. That's the only way I know how to approach anything. Then learn a different way. They stared at each other. The gallery was absolutely silent, except for the rain starting to tap against the windows. Teach me, Adrian said finally. Eleanor had not been expecting that. What? You said learn a different way. Teach me. I'm not your tutor, Your Grace. Adrian. She said it with enough emphasis to make it sound like a curse. I'm not interested in fixing you. I'm not asking you to fix me. I'm asking you to show me how you see the world because clearly it's different from how I see it, and He stopped again, jaw working like the words were fighting him. I want to understand you. Eleanor felt something crack in her chest. Not break, crack. Like ice under pressure. This man, this powerful, controlled, impossible man, was standing in an empty gallery asking her to teach him how to be human. And the terrifying part was that he meant it. Why me? She asked quietly. Out of everyone in London, everyone in England, why me? Adrian looked at her like the answer should be obvious. Because you're the only person who's ever looked at me and seen a man instead of a title. The rain picked up outside. Neither of them moved. 1 month, Eleanor heard herself say. What? You want to court me? Fine. 1 month. You have 1 month to convince me you're more than just power and control wrapped in an expensive suit. 1 month to show me you can actually feel something beyond ambition and responsibility. Adrian's eyes narrowed. And if I fail? Then you leave me alone and find someone more suitable. Someone who will be a proper duchess and never challenge you and let you turn into the same kind of cold, distant aristocrat as every other duke in England. And if I succeed? Eleanor smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. Then we'll see. She turned to leave, made it 3 steps before his voice stopped her. Eleanor. She looked back. Adrian was still standing where she'd left him, hands at his sides, looking more uncertain than she'd ever seen him. It was jarring, like watching a statue learn to breathe. I don't know how to do this, he said. I know. I'll probably do it wrong. Almost certainly. But I'll try, Eleanor nodded. That's all I'm asking. She left then, quickly, before she could do something stupid like go back to him. The carriage ride home felt longer than the ride there, the city streets blurring past in shades of gray and gold. When she got back to the Ashford estate, her mother was waiting in the entry hall, trying very hard to look like she just happened to be passing through. Well? Lady Ashford asked. Eleanor pulled off her gloves. He wants to court me. And? And I said yes. Her mother's face lit up in a way Eleanor hadn't seen in years. Oh, Eleanor, this is wonderful. We'll need to plan, of course. Your wardrobe will need updating, and we should host a dinner party, perhaps. Mother, Eleanor's voice cut through the planning like a knife. He doesn't care about my wardrobe, or dinner parties, or any of the performative nonsense you're about to suggest. Every man cares about... Adrian Blackmoor is not every man. Lady Ashford paused. You called him Adrian. It's his name. You've known him for one afternoon, and in that afternoon, he was more honest with me than father has been with you in 30 years of marriage. Eleanor started up the stairs. I'm going to my room. Please don't plan anything without asking me first. She didn't wait for a response. In her room, door locked, Eleanor sat at her desk and stared at nothing in particular. Her hands were shaking slightly. She pressed them flat against the wood until they stopped. 1 month. She'd given Adrian Blackmoor 1 month to prove he could be more than the Ice Duke everyone thought he was. 1 month to show her that underneath all that control, there was something worth reaching for. The terrifying part wasn't that he might fail. The terrifying part was that he might succeed, and Eleanor had absolutely no idea what she'd do if he did. The courtship began 3 days later, and it was nothing like anything Eleanor had experienced. Adrian didn't send flowers. He sent books, first editions, rare volumes, things he'd noticed her mentioning in passing. He didn't write love letters. He wrote observations, questions, arguments disguised as correspondence. He didn't take her to parties. He took her to his estate in the north, showed her the land he managed, the people who depended on him, the weight of everything he carried. This is what my life is, he told her, standing on a hill overlooking thousands of acres of farmland. Responsibility, duty, decisions that affect hundreds of families. You're trying to scare me off, Eleanor said. I'm trying to be honest. Same thing, in your case. They stood there in the wind, not touching, barely speaking, and Eleanor felt something shift between them. Not love, not yet, but recognition, the beginning of understanding. Back in London, society watched and whispered. The Duke of Blackmoor, courting someone. Actually courting someone with all the intensity he usually reserved for managing empires. People didn't know what to make of it. Neither did Eleanor. 2 weeks in, they had their first real fight. It happened at a dinner party hosted by the Wintertons, one of those excruciating affairs where 30 people pretended to enjoy overcooked meat and under-seasoned conversation. Eleanor had been cornered by Lord Ashworth, who was explaining his views on women's education with all the authority of someone who'd never educated a woman in his life. The female mind simply isn't structured for rigorous academic pursuit, he was saying, gesturing with his wineglass. It's a biological fact. Is it? Eleanor said flatly. Oh yes. Women are designed for domestic concerns, child rearing, household management, that sort of thing. Asking them to engage with philosophy or mathematics is like asking a horse to do arithmetic, cruel and pointless. Eleanor was opening her mouth to verbally dismantle him when Adrian appeared at her elbow. Lord Ashworth, he said. His voice was pleasant, too pleasant. I need to borrow Miss Ashford. Oh, of course, Your Grace. We were just discussing... I heard what you were discussing. Adrian's hand found the small of Eleanor's back, guiding her away before she could respond. They ended up in a small side room, door half closed, the sounds of the party muffled behind them. What was that? Eleanor demanded. I was removing you from an unpleasant conversation. I didn't need removing. I was handling it. By starting an argument in the middle of the Wintertons' dining room. By correcting someone's objectively wrong opinion about my own capabilities, yes. Adrian's jaw tightened. There are better ways to handle men like Ashworth. Such as ignoring them, rising above it. Eleanor stared at him. You want me to ignore someone calling women intellectually inferior? I want you to pick your battles. This is my battle. It's a pointless battle. Ashworth is an idiot. Everyone knows he's an idiot. Arguing with him won't change that. No, but it might stop him from saying idiotic things where I can hear them. Or it might make you look hysterical. The word hung in the air between them like smoke. Hysterical, Eleanor repeated quietly. Adrian seemed to realize he'd made a mistake. That's not what I... No, please, explain what you meant. Explain how me defending my own intelligence makes me hysterical, while you defending your investments and land makes you a savvy businessman. Eleanor, is this what you want? A wife who smiles and nods while men insult her? A duchess who rises above every casual cruelty because it's more dignified? I want... Adrian stopped, ran a hand through his hair. It was the first time she'd seen him actually frustrated. I want you safe. I want you protected from... From what? Ideas you disagree with? People who don't respect me? Adrian, that's half of London. Then maybe we shouldn't be in London. Is she... my client? Or maybe you need to accept that the woman you're courting isn't going to quietly tolerate being treated like decorative furniture. They glared at each other, both breathing harder than the conversation warranted. Finally, Adrian said, "You're right." Eleanor blinked. "What?" "You're right. I was wrong. Ashworth is an ass. You should have been allowed to eviscerate him verbally, and I shouldn't have interfered." He took a breath. "I'm sorry." Eleanor had not been expecting an apology, especially not one that direct. "Oh," she said. "I'm learning," Adrian said quietly, "but I'm going to make mistakes. Probably a lot of them. And I need you to keep calling me on them, because left to my own devices, I'll default to control, every time." Eleanor felt that crack in her chest widen a little more. "Okay," she said. "Okay? Okay. I'll keep calling you on it, but you have to actually listen." "I will." "Promise?" "I promise." They stood there in the half-dark, the party noise a distant buzz. Adrian reached out slowly, like he was approaching something wild, and took her hand, just held it, his thumb brushing across her knuckles. "This is harder than I thought it would be," he said. "What is?" "Caring about someone, having something to lose." Eleanor squeezed his hand. "Welcome to being human." "I don't like it." "Nobody does, that's the point." Adrian almost smiled then, really smiled, not just that flicker of amusement. It transformed his entire face, made him look younger, less carved from stone. "Come on," Eleanor said. "Let's go back before people think we're doing something scandalous." "Would that be so bad?" "Your Grace, are you suggesting we manufacture a scandal?" "I'm suggesting I don't particularly care what Lord Ashworth thinks of either of us." They went back to the party, together. And if Eleanor held Adrian's arm a little tighter than strictly necessary, if Adrian stood a little closer than propriety demanded, if they spent the rest of the evening in conversation that excluded everyone else. Well, society noticed. 3 weeks into the courtship, Eleanor realized she was falling in love with him. The realization hit during a completely unremarkable moment. They were in Adrian's study, going over estate management reports because he'd wanted her opinion on a dispute between tenant farmers, and he'd just made a note based on something she'd said without even thinking about it. "What?" he asked, looking up to find her staring. "You actually listened to me." "Why wouldn't I?" "Most men don't. Most men are fools." Eleanor laughed, and Adrian looked pleased with himself in that quiet way he had. And that's when it hit her, this feeling, this want, this sense that she'd found something she didn't even know she'd been looking for. She didn't tell him, not yet, but she thought he knew anyway. The month was almost up when Lord Julian Harrow arrived in London. Eleanor first saw him at a garden party, surrounded by a crowd of admirers, holding court like he'd been born to it, which, technically, he had. Younger son of an earl, military career, recently returned from India with enough stories and charisma to make him instantly popular. He was handsome in the way Adrian wasn't, bright where Adrian was dark, warm where Adrian was cool, easy where Adrian was complicated. And he noticed Eleanor immediately. "Miss Ashford," he said, appearing at her elbow with 2 glasses of champagne and a smile that probably worked on most women. "I've heard so much about you." "Have you?" The woman who brought the Duke of Blackmoor to his knees. Half of London is fascinated, the other half is terrified. "Which half are you?" Julian's smile widened. Intrigued, Eleanor took one of the champagne glasses. "That's a diplomatic answer." "I'm a diplomatic man." "Somehow I doubt that." They talked for 20 minutes. Julian was charming, funny, intelligent without being condescending. He asked her opinions and seemed genuinely interested in the answers. He flirted just enough to be interesting without being aggressive. Eleanor liked him, which was when Adrian found them. He didn't say anything at first, just appeared at Eleanor's other side with the kind of presence that made Julian's smile falter slightly. "Blackmoor," Julian said. "I was just making Miss Ashford's acquaintance." "So I see." Adrian's voice was neutral, but Eleanor could feel the tension radiating off him like heat. "We were discussing travel," Eleanor said quickly. "Lord Harrow has been to India." "How fascinating." Adrian looked at Julian like he was memorizing his face for future reference. "Welcome to London, Lord Harrow. I'm sure you'll find it educational." "I'm sure I will." The silence that followed was aggressive. "Well," Julian said eventually, "I should circulate. Miss Ashford, it was a pleasure, Your Grace." He nodded to Adrian and left, still smiling, but moving faster than strictly necessary. Eleanor turned to Adrian. "That was rude." "Yes." "You did it on purpose." "Yes." "Why?" Adrian looked at her, and for the first time she saw something uncontrolled in his expression, something raw. "Because he was looking at you like you were available," Adrian said quietly. "And you're not." "Adrian, are you?" He stepped closer, voice dropping. "Available?" Eleanor's heart kicked against her ribs. "No." "Then we're in agreement. We're in—" But even as he said it, even as Eleanor nodded, she couldn't help glancing back to where Julian had disappeared into the crowd. And Adrian noticed. The month ended. Adrian didn't ask for her answer. He simply appeared at the Ashford estate on the 31st day, stood in the drawing room, and waited. Eleanor came down the stairs slowly, aware of her mother hovering somewhere nearby, aware of the servants pretending not to listen, aware of the weight of the moment. "Well?" Adrian asked. Eleanor looked at him. This man who'd spent a month learning how to be human for her, who'd argued and apologized and tried so hard to be more than the ice duke everyone expected. "Yes," she said. Adrian's expression did something complicated. Relief, fear, joy, all fighting for space. "Yes?" "Yes, you can court me. Properly, publicly, for however long it takes." "Not engagement?" "Not yet." Eleanor smiled. "You've convinced me you can feel things, Adrian. Now convince me you can handle me feeling things back." He crossed the room in 3 strides, took her hands in his, and for a moment she thought he might actually kiss her right there in front of her mother and half the household staff. Instead, he just said, "Challenge accepted." And Eleanor, looking into those smoke-gray eyes, realized she had absolutely no idea what she'd just started. But she was willing to find out. The real courtship was about to begin. And Lord Julian Harrow was still in London, watching, waiting, smiling that easy smile. The storm, Eleanor thought, hadn't even started yet. The announcement appeared in the Times 3 days later, buried between estate sales and shipping news. The Duke of Blackmoor is formally courting Miss Eleanor Ashford of London. 12 words that detonated across society like a cannon shot. Eleanor's morning tea turned cold while her mother read the notice aloud for the 4th time, voice trembling with something between triumph and terror. "This is it," Lady Ashford kept saying. "This is everything we've worked toward." Eleanor stared out the breakfast room window, watching carriages roll past in the early fog. Everything they'd worked toward. As if Eleanor's entire existence had been a long preparation for becoming someone's duchess, someone's possession, someone's carefully managed asset. "You're not listening," her mother said sharply. "I'm listening. You're just not saying anything new." Lady Ashford's teacup hit the table harder than necessary. "You could at least pretend to be grateful." "For what? Being reduced to a 12-word announcement in a newspaper? For securing the most eligible man in England." "I haven't secured anything, Mother. We're courting. That's all." "Adrian Blackmoor doesn't court women for amusement, Eleanor. When he commits absolutely." That was the problem, wasn't it? Adrian's absolutes, his certainties, the way he approached everything, including her, like a military campaign. Each move calculated, each risk assessed. Eleanor had spent a month teaching him to feel, and he'd learned, but his feelings came wrapped in the same iron control as everything else in his life. She was starting to wonder if that control could ever really break. or if she even wanted it to. The first test came that afternoon at Lady Pemberton's salon, one of those carefully curated gatherings where London's elite pretended to care about art and literature while actually just trading gossip and judgment. Eleanor arrived late, deliberately, and found the room already full. She spotted Adrian immediately. He was hard to miss, standing near the fireplace like he owned it, deep in conversation with two older gentlemen who looked appropriately intimidated. His eyes found hers the moment she entered, tracked her across the room with that unsettling intensity he had. She was halfway to him when Julian Harrow intercepted her. "Miss Ashford." He appeared at her elbow with a glass of wine and that easy, dangerous smile. "You're radiant." "Lord Harrow." Eleanor accepted the wine because refusing would have caused a scene. "I didn't realize you'd be here." Lady Pemberton's salons are unmissable. All of London's finest minds, gathered to discuss Wordsworth and pretend they understand him. He gestured around the room with theatrical flourish. Magnificent hypocrisy. Despite herself, Eleanor laughed. "That's one way to describe it. I prefer honest assessment to polite fiction. Life's too short for the latter." Across the room, Adrian had stopped talking. He was watching them now, expression unreadable, but Eleanor could feel the weight of his attention like pressure against her skin. "Your Duke is staring," Julian observed. "Should I be worried?" "He's not my Duke." The Times begs to differ. The Times doesn't know everything. Julian's smile widened. "Now that's interesting." "What is?" "That hesitation in your voice, that tiny flicker of doubt." He leaned closer, not quite improper, but close enough to feel deliberate. "Tell me, Miss Ashford, are you happy?" The question landed like a stone in still water. "That's a rather personal question from someone I barely know," Eleanor said. "Is it? I find happiness fairly straightforward. Either you are or you aren't. Life is rarely that simple. Only because people complicate it unnecessarily." Julian tilted his head, studying her. "Adrian Blackmoor is a remarkable man, powerful, intelligent, wealthy, everything a woman could want by conventional measure. But I've seen men like him before. Men so consumed by duty and control that they forget how to actually live. They build empires and call it purpose. They manage estates and call it legacy. They marry strategically and call it love." He paused. "Is that what you want? A strategic marriage?" Eleanor's fingers tightened around her wine glass. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Don't I?" Julian's voice dropped lower, lost some of that performative charm. "I spent 10 years in India, Miss Ashford. 10 years watching British officers marry suitable women and slowly suffocate under the weight of propriety. I've seen what happens when duty trumps desire. It's a slow death. Elegant, perhaps. Socially acceptable. But death nonetheless. And what would you suggest as an alternative?" "Living. Actually living. Choosing passion over position. Adventure over assets." He smiled again, but this time it looked genuine. Choosing happiness over what's expected. Before Eleanor could respond, Adrian materialized beside them. He didn't say anything, just stood there, radiating controlled displeasure, and Julian's smile turned sharp. "Your Grace," Julian said smoothly. "We were just discussing literature." "Were you?" Adrian's voice could have frozen nitrogen. "Poetry specifically. Miss Ashford has excellent taste." "I'm aware of Miss Ashford's qualities, Lord Harrow. You needn't enumerate them." Julian laughed, actually laughed, and Eleanor saw Adrian's jaw tighten. "Of course, forgive me. I sometimes forget that courting involves declaring exclusive observation rights." "It involves respect," Adrian said quietly. "Something you seem unfamiliar with." The temperature in their immediate vicinity dropped 10 degrees. Around them, conversation stuttered and died as people turned to watch. "Respect," Julian repeated. "Interesting word choice from a man who treats courtship like a business merger." Adrian took a half step forward. "You know nothing about my courtship. I know what I see. A beautiful, intelligent woman being slowly absorbed into someone else's predetermined life. That's enough." Eleanor's voice cut between them like a blade. "Both of you." They turned to her in unison, and she saw it then, the fundamental difference between them. Adrian looked guilty, aware he'd crossed a line. Julian looked delighted, like he'd achieved exactly what he'd set out to do. "Lord Harrow," Eleanor said coldly, "thank you for the wine and the conversation. Both were illuminating. Meaning? Meaning you should leave before this gets uglier than it already is." Julian's smile didn't falter. "Of course, Your Grace, Miss Ashford." He bowed, still smiling, and melted back into the crowd. The silence he left behind felt radioactive. "We're leaving," Adrian said. We just got here." "Eleanor?" He said her name like it hurt. "Please." She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw something she'd never seen before. Fear. Actual, honest fear, barely controlled behind that mask of ducal composure. "Fine," she said. "But we're talking about this." They made their excuses to Lady Pemberton, who watched them leave with calculating eyes. The carriage ride back to the Ashford estate was silent, tension thick enough to chew. Adrian sat across from her, hands clenched on his knees, staring at nothing. "Say something," Eleanor finally demanded. "What would you like me to say? That you're sorry for acting like a territorial wolf? That you trust me not to be seduced by the first charming man who pays me attention? That you see me as something more than property to be guarded?" Adrian's head snapped up. "You think I see you as property? I think you see me as something that needs protecting. There's a difference, but it amounts to the same thing. He was flirting with you, publicly, deliberately. So? Adrian looked like she'd slapped him. So he was disrespecting our courtship, disrespecting me. This isn't about you, Adrian. This is about me, my choices, my autonomy. I know that. Do you? Because from where I'm sitting, you just treated me like a contested territory in front of half of London." The carriage lurched to a stop outside the Ashford estate. Adrian didn't move, just sat there in the dim light, jaw working. "I'm not good at this," he said finally. "At what?" "Vulnerability, uncertainty, the possibility of losing." He looked at her, and his eyes were dark. "I've spent my entire adult life eliminating variables, controlling outcomes, ensuring success. And then you—" He stopped. "Then I what? Then you became the one variable I can't control, and it's terrifying." Eleanor's anger stuttered, caught. "Adrian, Harrow's right. I do approach everything like a business merger. I do treat life like something to be managed. It's all I know." His voice dropped. "But I'm trying to learn. For you. And watching another man flirt with you, seeing you smile at his jokes, wondering if maybe he's right and you'd be happier with someone who isn't." He gestured at himself, sharp and frustrated. "Isn't this? You think I want Julian Harrow? I think he can offer you something I can't. Ease, warmth, a life without the weight of duty crushing everything else." Eleanor stared at him. This man, this powerful, impossible man, genuinely believed he wasn't enough. That his love, because it was love, even if neither of them had said it, wasn't sufficient. "You're an idiot," she said. Adrian blinked. "What?" "An absolute idiot. Brilliant in every other way, but emotionally, complete idiot." Eleanor, she leaned forward close enough that their knees touched. "Julian Harrow is charming and warm and easy to talk to, and I don't want him." "You don't?" "No, you spectacular fool. I want the difficult man who's learning to be human. I want the Duke who's terrified of losing control. I want the person who argues with me and apologizes, and tries so damned hard even when it clearly kills him." She grabbed his hands. "I want you, all your complications, all your sharp edges, all your absolutely infuriating need to protect me from things I don't need protection from." Adrian's breath caught. "You want me?" "Yes. Even though I'm—" "Especially because you are." He kissed her then, finally. After weeks of careful distance and proper behavior, he closed the gap between them and kissed her like a man dying of thirst. His hands came up to frame her face, careful even in desperation, and Eleanor kissed him back with everything she'd been holding in. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Adrian rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said. Raw, uncontrolled, true. "I know," Eleanor whispered. "I love you too." "Then marry me." Eleanor pulled back. What? Marry me. Not someday. Not eventually. Now. Soon. Before I lose my mind watching other men try to take you away. Adrian, I know it's fast. I know it's intense. I know it probably violates 17 different social protocols. He was still holding her face, thumbs brushing her cheekbones. I don't care. I want you. I want this. I want to wake up every morning knowing you're mine and I'm yours, and nothing can change that. Eleanor's heart was hammering. You're serious? Completely. This is insane. Probably. People will talk. Let them. She should say no. She should demand more time, more courtship, more certainty. That's what a sensible woman would do. Eleanor had never been particularly sensible. Ask me properly, she said. Adrian smiled, really smiled, the expression transforming his face. He slid off the carriage seat, kneeling on the floor between their seats, and took both her hands in his. Eleanor Ashford, he said, will you marry me? Will you take on my complications and my sharp edges and my absolutely infuriating need to protect you? Will you teach me to be human and call me on my mistakes and love me despite all the reasons you shouldn't? Yes, Eleanor said. Yes to all of it. He kissed her again, and she felt the carriage rock slightly with the weight of their combined relief. When they finally emerged, disheveled and breathless, her mother was waiting in the entry hall with an expression of scandalized delight. Eleanor Ashford, Lady Ashford said. What on earth? We're engaged, Eleanor announced. Her mother's face went through several complicated emotions in rapid succession. Engaged? But you've only been… We're engaged, Adrian repeated, voice firm, if that's acceptable to you and Lord Ashford. Acceptable? Of course it's… Eleanor, this is… Lady Ashford looked like she might actually cry. Oh, this is wonderful. Eleanor waited for the rush of happiness, the sense of rightness, the certainty that she'd made the correct choice. Instead, she felt Julian Harrow's words circling in her head like carrion birds. Duty trumps desire. Strategic marriage, a slow death. She pushed them away. Adrian loved her. She loved him. That was enough. It had to be enough. The engagement announcement hit London like a second cannon shot. This time, it made the front page of the Times, complete with speculation about the wedding date and verbose commentary on the joining of two ancient families. Eleanor's name was suddenly on everyone's lips. The woman who'd captured the uncatchable Duke, the beauty who'd brought Blackmoor to his knees, the future Duchess who'd changed everything. She hated every word of it. The attention intensified over the following week. Invitations flooded in, each more prestigious than the last. Everyone wanted the newly engaged couple at their events, wanted to be seen with them, wanted to claim they'd known all along that this would happen. Adrian handled it with his usual controlled grace. Eleanor felt like she was drowning. You're quiet, Adrian observed one afternoon. They were in his London study, supposedly reviewing wedding plans, but mostly just sitting in companionable silence. I'm thinking. About? Everything. Nothing. Whether we're making a mistake. Adrian set down his papers. Do you think we're making a mistake? I don't know. Eleanor stood, paced to the window. Sometimes I look at you and I'm absolutely certain. And then I think about actually becoming your Duchess. About the weight of that title, the expectations, the way everyone will watch everything I do. We can wait, Adrian said quietly. What? If you're not ready, if you need more time, we can delay the wedding. Eleanor turned to look at him. Would you resent me for that? No. Are you sure? Adrian stood, crossed to her, took her hands. Eleanor, I love you. That means I want you to be certain, completely certain, even if that takes months, years, however long you need. And if I'm never certain, then we won't marry. Just like that? Just like that. He squeezed her hands. I want you, not the idea of you, not the Duchess you'd become. You, as you are, with all your doubts and complications and absolutely rational fear of what marrying me would mean. Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. How are you so good at saying exactly the right thing now? Practice and desperation. She laughed, watery but genuine. I do want to marry you, but I'm terrified it'll change everything. That I'll lose myself in becoming your Duchess. That I'll wake up in 5 years and not recognize my own life. Then we'll make sure that doesn't happen. How? However we need to. Adrian's voice was fierce. Eleanor, listen to me. I'm not interested in absorbing you into my life. I'm interested in building a life with you. That means compromise, change, letting you shape our future as much as I do. You say that now, and I'll say it every day for the rest of our lives if that's what it takes for you to believe me. Eleanor wanted to believe him, desperately wanted to trust that love could actually be enough, that they could beat the odds, that she wouldn't become just another aristocratic wife slowly suffocating under the weight of duty and expectation. Before she could respond, Adrian's butler knocked and entered without waiting for permission, which meant something serious had happened. Your Grace, Miss Ashford, Lord Julian Harrow is here requesting an audience. Eleanor and Adrian exchanged glances. Show him in, Adrian said. Julian entered with his usual easy confidence, but Eleanor noticed tension around his eyes. He bowed to Adrian, smiled at Eleanor, and got straight to the point. I've come to apologize, he said. Adrian's eyebrows rose fractionally. Have you? Yes. My behavior at Lady Pemberton's salon was inappropriate. I overstepped, deliberately provoked you, and disrespected both your courtship and Miss Ashford's autonomy. He looked directly at Eleanor. I'm genuinely sorry. Eleanor didn't trust it. The words were right, but something in Julian's eyes suggested a different game entirely. Apology accepted, she said carefully. There's something else. Julian turned back to Adrian. I'm leaving London, heading north, actually, to Yorkshire. Yorkshire. Adrian's voice went flat. I've purchased an estate near Harrogate. Small, relatively speaking, but I'm told the hunting is excellent. Julian's smile turned sharp. We'll be neighbors, in a sense, once you're married and installed at Blackmoor Hall. The silence that followed felt dangerous. How fortunate, Adrian said in a tone that meant the opposite. Isn't it? Julian looked between them. I do hope there won't be any awkwardness. After all, we're all adults here, all capable of civility. Civility, Adrian repeated. Of course. Eleanor wanted to scream. This wasn't an apology. This was a declaration of war. Julian was moving to Yorkshire deliberately, positioning himself in their lives permanently, ensuring that Eleanor would never quite escape his presence or his alternative. Thank you for coming, Lord Harrow, she said, voice cold. And for your apology. Was there anything else? Just one thing. Julian's eyes locked on hers. I hope you'll be happy, Miss Ashford. Truly. But if you ever find yourself reconsidering your choices, well, I'll be nearby. He left before either of them could respond. The door clicked shut. Adrian turned to Eleanor, face carefully blank. This complicates things, he said. That's an understatement. He's doing this deliberately, trying to undermine our engagement. I know. Does it change anything? Adrian asked quietly. For you? Eleanor looked at him, at this man she loved, this complicated, difficult, absolutely infuriating man, and made a decision. No, she said, it doesn't change anything. You're sure? I'm sure. Adrian exhaled. Then we proceed as planned. Wedding in 6 weeks? Wedding in 6 weeks. They stood there in his study, hands clasped, and Eleanor tried not to think about Julian Harrow setting up a permanent residence 10 miles from where she'd spend the rest of her life. Tried not to wonder if this was what freedom looked like, or just a more elegant cage. Tried not to hear that voice in her head whispering that maybe, just maybe, she was making the biggest mistake of her life. The engagement party happened 3 weeks later, hosted at the Blackmoor London residence with enough aristocratic firepower to intimidate a small country. Eleanor spent the evening in a dress that cost more than some people's annual income, smiling until her face hurt, accepting congratulations from people she barely knew and didn't particularly like. Adrian never left her side. He introduced her to ministers and magnates, to distant relatives and business associates, his hand a constant presence at the small of her back, claiming her, protecting her, possessing her. Eleanor told herself the suffocation she felt was just nerves. Halfway through the evening, she escaped to a balcony for air. The London night was surprisingly clear, stars visible between chimney smoke. She stood there breathing cold air and trying to remember why she'd said yes to any of this. Regretting it already? She spun. Julian Harrow leaned against the balcony doorframe, champagne glass in hand, looking entirely too pleased with himself. "What are you doing here?" Eleanor demanded. "I was invited. Your future husband is very gracious." He stepped onto the balcony, close but not threatening. "Also, I wanted to see if you were happy, genuinely happy, not performance happy." "That's none of your business." "Probably not, but I'm curious anyway." Eleanor turned back to the view. "I'm fine. That's not what I asked." "It's all you're getting." Julian was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice had lost its usual playful edge. "I watched my sister marry a duke when I was 16. Beautiful wedding, perfect match by every social measure. 6 years later, she killed herself." Eleanor's breath caught. "Julian." "They called it an accident, claimed she fell down the stairs, but I saw her face in the weeks before, saw the way she'd flinch when he touched her, the way she'd stare out windows like she was looking for escape routes." He set his champagne glass on the balcony rail. He wasn't cruel, wasn't violent, just empty. And she slowly became empty too until there was nothing left but the Duchess-shaped shell everyone expected her to be. "I'm not your sister." "No, you're stronger, smarter. But Adrian Blackmoor is also more powerful than the Duke my sister married, more controlled, more absolutely certain of his own righteousness." Julian looked at her. "I'm not trying to steal you away, Eleanor. I'm trying to save your life." "By what? Offering yourself as an alternative?" "By offering you an exit strategy, before it's too late." "It's already too late. The engagement is announced. The wedding is planned. I gave my word. Words can be taken back." "Not by people like me." Julian smiled, sad and knowing. "That's exactly the problem. People like you, raised to believe duty trumps desire, to sacrifice yourselves on the altar of propriety. It's what killed my sister. It's what kills hundreds of women every year, slowly, quietly, respectably." Eleanor's hands clenched on the balcony rail. "What do you want from me?" "I want you to be sure. Absolutely, completely sure. Not resigned, not dutiful, sure." "I am sure." "Are you? Or are you just too proud to admit you might have made a mistake?" Before Eleanor could answer, the balcony door opened and Adrian appeared. He took in the scene, Eleanor and Julian close together, intense conversation, and his expression went absolutely flat. "Lord Harrow," he said, "I believe you're needed inside." "Am I?" "Yes." Julian looked at Eleanor one last time. "Think about what I said." He left. Adrian took his place, but kept more distance, as if afraid to get too close. "What did he say?" Adrian asked. "Nothing important." "Eleanor." She turned to him, suddenly exhausted. "He told me about his sister, about watching her marry a duke and slowly disappear, and then he asked if I was sure about marrying you." "And what did you tell him?" "That I was sure." "Were you lying?" The question hung between them like a blade. "I don't know," Eleanor said finally. "I love you. I want to marry you. But I'm also terrified of losing myself in the process. And I don't know if that's normal pre-wedding nerves or a genuine warning I should listen to." Adrian was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was careful. "If you need to postpone, I don't want to postpone. I want to be certain." "Then what do you need?" "I need—" Eleanor stopped, realizing something. "I need to see what my life would actually look like. Not the engagement parties and the announcements. The reality. Your estates. Your responsibilities. The weight of everything I'd be taking on." "You want to come to Yorkshire?" "Yes." "Unchaperoned?" "We're engaged, and I don't care about propriety anymore. I care about truth." Adrian studied her face like he was trying to memorize it. "When?" "Now, soon, before I lose my nerve." "This will cause talk." "Let it. Your mother will be horrified." "My mother has been horrified by me since birth. One more scandal won't change anything." Adrian smiled slightly. "You're serious about this?" "Completely." "Then we leave in 3 days." Eleanor felt something shift in her chest. Fear or relief, she couldn't tell. 3 days. Pack for harsh weather. Yorkshire in late autumn is not forgiving. I can handle harsh. We'll see, Adrian said. And there was something in his voice, a warning or a promise, that made Eleanor's pulse quicken. 3 days later, as London disappeared behind them and the carriage rolled north toward Yorkshire's brutal countryside, Eleanor wondered if she was running toward certainty or away from a decision she'd already made. Either way, she was about to find out what it actually meant to be Adrian Blackmoor's Duchess, and whether she could survive it. Yorkshire hit Eleanor like a fist. The carriage rolled through gates marking Blackmoor territory just as the first snow began to fall. Not the pretty decorative snow London sometimes got, but hard, mean flakes that stung exposed skin and promised worse to come. Eleanor pressed her face to the window, watching the landscape transform from rolling hills to something more severe. Bare trees clawed at gray sky. Stone walls divided frozen fields. In the distance, tenant cottages huddled together like animals seeking warmth. "It's beautiful," she said, because it was, in a harsh and unforgiving way. Adrian, sitting across from her, made a sound that might have been agreement or warning. "Wait until you see the estate." Blackmoor Hall appeared through the snow like something out of a ghost story. Massive, stone, built not for elegance but for survival, with walls thick enough to withstand siege and windows narrow enough to shoot arrows through. It dominated the landscape the way Adrian dominated a room, through sheer, uncompromising presence. "This is where you grew up," Eleanor said. "This is where I became a duke at 19 after my father died in a hunting accident." Adrian's voice was flat. "This is where I learned that power means responsibility, and responsibility means carrying weight until it breaks you, or you learn to bear it." The carriage stopped. Servants appeared, fewer than Eleanor expected, hardier looking, dressed for function over fashion. They moved with the efficiency of people who knew cold weather didn't wait for ceremony. Inside, the hall was warmer but no less imposing. Stone floors, high ceilings, tapestries depicting battles and hunts. Everything built to last centuries, to outlive the people who inhabited it. Eleanor felt the weight of history pressed down like atmospheric pressure. "Your Grace," an older woman appeared, iron gray hair pulled back severely, dressed in black. "Miss Ashford, I'm Mrs. Bramwell, the housekeeper. Your rooms are prepared." "Thank you, Mrs. Bramwell." Adrian's hand found Eleanor's back, a gesture that was becoming automatic. "Miss Ashford will need warm clothing. The London wardrobe won't suffice here." Mrs. Bramwell's eyes flicked to Eleanor, assessing. "Of course. I'll have proper woolens sent up." Eleanor wanted to protest that she could dress herself, but the housekeeper was already gone, moving with the brisk authority of someone who'd been running this place longer than Adrian had been alive. "She seems formidable," Eleanor said. "She is. Mrs. Bramwell has managed Blackmoor Hall for 40 years. She knew my father, my grandfather. She'll outlast me too, probably." Adrian started toward a massive staircase. "Come, I'll show you to your room." The room turned out to be a suite, bedroom, sitting room, private study, all connected and all absolutely freezing despite a roaring fire in each hearth. Eleanor stood in the middle of the bedroom, watching her breath mist in the air, and realized something. This was real. Not courtship games in London drawing rooms, not engagement parties and society gossip. This was the actual life she'd signed up for. Stone walls and bitter cold and responsibility heavy as the ancient beams holding up the ceiling. "Eleanor," Adrian's voice pulled her back. "What's wrong?" "Nothing. Everything. I don't know." She turned to him. "How do you live like this?" "Like what?" "Like you're holding up the world." Adrian was quiet for a moment. Then he crossed to her, took her hands, and they were ice cold even through her gloves. "You're freezing." "The fire isn't helping much." "Yorkshire fires are different. They don't warm, they just prevent freezing." Started removing her gloves. "The first winter I spent here alone after my father died, I thought I'd go mad. The isolation, the cold, the constant awareness that hundreds of people depended on me for survival." "How did you bear it?" "I stopped trying to fight it. Started accepting that some weights can't be set down, only carried better." "That's bleak." "That's reality." Eleanor's carefully constructed image of their future cracked a little more. And you want me to share this reality? I want you to see it before you commit to it. That's why we're here. And if I can't handle it? Adrian's hands tightened on hers. Then we find another way. But Eleanor, he stopped, jaw working. I need you to understand something. Being my Duchess won't be elegant dinners and charity balls. It'll be this: hard choices and harder winters. Tenant disputes and crop failures and managing an empire that depends on you making the right decisions every single day. You're trying to scare me off again. I'm trying to be honest. Maybe I don't want honesty right now. Maybe I want you to lie and tell me it'll be fine. It won't be fine. It'll be brutal. But Adrian's voice dropped. It'll be ours. Together. That's the only guarantee I can make. Before Eleanor could respond, a knock interrupted them. Mrs. Bramwell entered with an armload of heavy woolens and a younger servant carrying more. Proper Yorkshire clothes, Miss Ashford. You'll need them. The clothes were nothing like Eleanor's London wardrobe. Thick wool dresses in dark colors, heavy stockings, a coat that weighed as much as she did, practical boots with real soles. Mrs. Bramwell helped her change with the same brisk efficiency she brought to everything. And when Eleanor looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. You look like you could survive, the housekeeper said. That's more than most London girls manage. It wasn't a compliment, not exactly, but coming from Mrs. Bramwell, it felt like one. Thank you, Eleanor said. Don't thank me yet. Winter's just starting. Over the next week, Eleanor discovered what Mrs. Bramwell meant. Adrian took her through every aspect of estate management: tenant farms where families lived on the edge of survival, livestock operations that meant the difference between eating and starving, grain storage that had to last until spring. He introduced her to his tenants, and they looked at her with the same assessing gaze Mrs. Bramwell had used, measuring, judging, deciding if this London girl had what it took. Most of them clearly thought she didn't. She's too soft, Eleanor heard one farmer mutter to Adrian when they thought she was out of earshot. Pretty thing, probably good for parties, but when the snow comes heavy and decisions need making, she'll fold. Adrian's response was too quiet to hear, but the farmer looked chastened. That night, over dinner in a dining room built for 50 but occupied by 2, Eleanor confronted it. Your people think I'm useless. Adrian looked up from his plate. They think you're untested. There's a difference. Feels the same. It's not. Untested means you haven't had the chance to prove yourself yet. Useless means you never could. And which do you think I am? I think you're the woman who told me to learn how to be human. I think you're strong enough to handle anything Yorkshire throws at you. But I also think... He stopped. What? I think you're looking for reasons to run. Eleanor's fork clattered against her plate. Excuse me? Every challenge, every hardship, every moment someone doubts you. You collect them like evidence, building a case for why this won't work. Maybe because it won't. Or maybe because you're terrified it will, and then you'll have no excuse not to commit completely. The words hit like a slap. Eleanor stood, chair scraping back. You don't know what you're talking about, don't I? Adrian stood too. Eleanor, I love you. I want to marry you. But I need you to decide if you actually want this life, or if you're just too proud to admit Julian Harrow might have been right. Don't you dare bring him into this. He's already in this. He's in your head, whispering doubts, offering alternatives. This isn't about Julian. This is about me trying to figure out if I can survive in a place where everyone thinks I'm a decorative liability. Then prove them wrong. Adrian's voice rose, echoing off stone walls. Stop looking for permission to fail and start fighting to succeed. They stared at each other across the table, both breathing hard. Eleanor felt tears threatening and hated herself for it. I need air, she said. Eleanor, I need air. She grabbed her heavy coat and walked out before he could stop her. The hall's corridors were maze-like, but she'd learned them well enough to find an exit. Outside, the snow had stopped temporarily, leaving everything covered in white silence. Eleanor walked without direction, boots crunching through snow, breath steaming. She made it maybe half a mile before she heard hoofbeats. Julian Harrow reined in his horse beside her, looking like some romance novel hero with snow in his dark hair and color in his cheeks. Eleanor Ashford, he said, walking alone in a Yorkshire snowstorm. Either you're very brave or very stupid. What are you doing here? I live here now, remember? Estate's just over that ridge. He swung down from his horse. You look upset. I'm fine. You're a terrible liar. Julian studied her face. What did he do? He told me the truth. Which was? That I'm looking for reasons to run instead of reasons to stay. Julian was quiet for a moment. Then, is he wrong? I don't know. The words burst out of her. I don't know anything anymore. I love him. I want to marry him. But I also look at this place, at these people who think I'm worthless, at a life that's just endless cold and duty and carrying impossible weight, and I wonder if I'm strong enough. You are, Eleanor laughed bitterly. You don't know that. Yes, I do. I've watched you navigate London society, which is its own kind of brutal. I've seen you stand up to Adrian Blackmoor when most people won't even make eye contact. You're strong enough, Eleanor. The question is whether you want to spend that strength on this. What's the alternative? Julian's eyes were very steady. Me. A smaller estate. Less responsibility. Freedom to actually live instead of just surviving. Warmth instead of endless winter. Julian, I know. I know you love him, but love isn't always enough. Sometimes survival matters more. He stepped closer. I'm leaving for London tomorrow. Final business to settle before the winter locks us all in. Come with me. Take some time away from all this. Clear your head. And if you decide to come back to Adrian, I'll respect that. But at least give yourself the option. Eleanor looked back toward Blackmoor Hall, barely visible through the trees. Then at Julian, offering exactly what she'd been craving, escape. I can't, she said finally. Can't or won't? Both, neither. I don't know. Julian smiled sadly. Then you're not ready to marry anyone. He mounted his horse, looked down at her. The offer stands until tomorrow at dawn. My carriage leaves whether you're in it or not. He rode away, leaving Eleanor alone in the snow. She stood there until the cold penetrated even her heavy coat, until her fingers went numb and her breath came in clouds. Then she turned back toward the hall. Adrian was waiting in the entry hall, face carved from stone. Where were you? Walking? For an hour? In this weather? I needed to think. About what? His eyes narrowed. Or should I ask about whom? Eleanor's temper flared. I ran into Julian. He was riding near the property. How convenient. It was an accident. Was it? Or did you arrange it? Are you seriously accusing me of... I don't know what to think anymore, Eleanor. You disappear for an hour in dangerous weather, come back frozen and evasive, and expect me to just... He asked me to leave with him. The words cut through Adrian's rising anger like a blade. Tomorrow morning, carriage to London, an escape from all this. The silence was absolute. And Adrian's voice was deadly quiet. And I said no. Did you mean it? What? Did you mean it? Or are you just telling me what I want to hear while you consider his offer? Eleanor's hand moved before she thought about it, palm connecting with Adrian's cheek in a crack that echoed through the hall. His head snapped sideways. She saw Mrs. Bramwell freeze in a doorway, servants scatter. How dare you, Eleanor said, voice shaking. How dare you question my honesty after everything? After I came here, endured your people's judgment, tried to understand this impossible life you're offering. Eleanor, no. You don't get to talk now. You wanted me to see reality? Fine. Here's reality. I'm terrified. I'm overwhelmed. I have no idea if I can be the Duchess this place needs, but I'm here. I'm trying. And instead of helping me, instead of supporting me, you're accusing me of plotting to run away with another man. Adrian's cheek was red where she'd hit him. He made no move to touch it. You're right, he said finally. I'm sorry. Sorry isn't enough. I know, but it's all I have right now. He took a careful step toward her. I'm terrified too, Eleanor. Terrified you'll realize this life isn't worth it, that I'm not worth it, and that fear is making you into exactly the kind of controlling, suspicious husband I'm afraid you'll become. The words landed like a physical blow. Adrian actually flinched. Is that what you think I'll be? I don't know. That's the problem. I don't know if we can survive this. If I can survive this. Eleanor's voice broke. I love you. But love doesn't pay tenant farmers or survive Yorkshire winters or prove to your people that I'm worthy of being here. Then what does? I don't know. The door burst open. A young man, one of Adrian's estate managers, stumbled in covered in snow and breathing hard. Your Grace? Emergency. The river. It's flooding the lower farms. 3 families trapped. We need every able body now or people will die. Adrian's face went absolutely blank. All personal emotion shuddered in an instant, the Duke replacing the man. How long do we have? An hour? Maybe less? The ice is breaking up upstream. Adrian turned to Eleanor. I have to go. I know. This conversation can wait. People are dying. Something flickered in Adrian's eyes. Then he was moving, shouting orders, and the hall erupted into controlled chaos. Servants ran for supplies, horses were saddled, men appeared from every direction, grim-faced and ready. Eleanor stood in the middle of it all, feeling useless. Then Mrs. Bramwell appeared at her elbow. You, with me. What? You want to prove you're not decorative? Here's your chance. The housekeeper thrust blankets and medical supplies into Eleanor's arms. We're taking the second wagon. Those families will need warming and treatment if they survive. I don't know how to... Then you'll learn. Move. Eleanor moved. The ride to the lower farms was brutal. Wind cut through even the heavy coat, snow reduced visibility to almost nothing, and the wagon lurched over frozen ruts hard enough to crack bone. Eleanor clung to the seat beside Mrs. Bramwell, terror and adrenaline mixing until she couldn't tell them apart. When they arrived, the scene was chaos. The river had breached its banks, flooding fields and creeping toward the tenant cottages. Men were building hasty barriers with whatever they could find. Women evacuated children and livestock. And Adrian was in the middle of it all, up to his waist in freezing water, directing rescue efforts like a general conducting battle. Eleanor watched him lift a child over his head and pass her to safety, then turn back for more without hesitation. Don't just stand there, Mrs. Bramwell snapped. Those children need warming before they freeze to death. Eleanor scrambled down from the wagon. A woman thrust a sobbing infant into her arms and disappeared back toward the flood. The baby was ice cold, lips blue, barely crying. Eleanor's mind went blank with panic. Blankets, Mrs. Bramwell barked. Skin contact, body heat, now! Eleanor stripped off her coat, wrapped the infant against her, adding blankets over both of them. The baby's cries were weak, too weak. She started walking, bouncing, rubbing the tiny back, doing anything to generate warmth. Come on, she whispered. Come on, stay with me. Around her, chaos continued. More children appeared, more families dragging possessions through rising water. And Eleanor kept moving, kept warming the infant, kept whispering encouragement even as her own body started to shake from cold. She didn't know how long it went on. Time became a blur of freezing water, desperate people, and the constant battle against cold that wanted to kill them all. When the baby finally screamed, really screamed, healthy and furious, Eleanor nearly collapsed with relief. Good, Mrs. Bramwell said, appearing beside her. You're not completely useless. Next one. Eleanor took the next child, and the next, and the next. Her arms burned, her body shook, but she kept going because stopping meant people died. It was fully dark when Adrian finally called the evacuation complete. The flooding had been stopped, barely, and all the families were accounted for. Eleanor stood in what had become a refugee camp, surrounded by shivering people and the smell of wet wool. Adrian found her there. He looked half dead, soaked, shaking, face gray with exhaustion. You shouldn't have come, he said. Neither should you. You're hypothermic. I'm fine. You're a liar. Eleanor grabbed his arm. Come on, we need to get you warm before... He collapsed. Not dramatically. Just his legs giving out, body finally admitting what his will had been denying. Eleanor caught him, barely, and they went down together in the snow. Adrian! His eyes were open but unfocused. The families are safe. All of them. Because of you. Now shut up and let me help you. Mrs. Bramwell materialized with more blankets. Together, they got Adrian into the wagon. The ride back to the hall felt endless. Eleanor held Adrian against her, feeling his violent shivering, terrified she was watching him die. Don't you dare, she kept whispering. Don't you dare leave me like this. At the hall, servants stripped them both down and thrust them into hot baths. Eleanor's skin screamed as feeling returned. She heard Adrian groaning in the next room and wanted to go to him, but her body wouldn't cooperate. Later, hours later, maybe days, she'd lost track, Eleanor woke in her bed to find Mrs. Bramwell sitting in a chair nearby. How long? 12 hours. You were exhausted. The housekeeper's face was unreadable. The Duke is asking for you. Eleanor stumbled out of bed, legs unsteady, and followed Mrs. Bramwell to Adrian's room. He was propped up in bed, looking almost as exhausted as she felt, but alive. Definitely alive. You're awake, he said. So are you. Disappointed? Furious. You could have died. So could you. Coming out in that weather, with no experience, someone had to help those children. Adrian's expression did something complicated. Yes, they did. He reached for her hand. You saved 3 lives yesterday. Mrs. Bramwell told me. 3 children who would have died from exposure if you hadn't kept them warm. Anyone would have... No, they wouldn't have. Most London society women would have fainted at the first sight of blood. You kept working until everyone was safe. Eleanor sat on the edge of his bed. I was terrified the entire time. Good. Terror keeps you careful. He squeezed her hand. Eleanor, I need to tell you something. What? What I said before, about you looking for reasons to run. I was wrong. You're not running. You're fighting. Fighting to understand this life. Fighting to find your place in it. Fighting to figure out if we can survive together. And that's... His voice cracked slightly. That's all I can ask for. Eleanor felt tears start. I don't know if I can do this. Neither do I. But I watched you yesterday, holding those children, keeping them alive through sheer force of will, and I realized something. What? You're already doing it. You're already the Duchess this place needs. You just don't see it yet. Your people still think I'm useless. They thought. Past tense. Word spreads fast here. By now, every tenant family knows the London girl stood in freezing water for hours saving children. You earned more respect yesterday than most duchesses earn in a lifetime. Eleanor wanted to believe him, desperately wanted to trust that yesterday had changed things, but doubt still whispered in the back of her mind. Julian leaves for London tomorrow, she said quietly. Adrian went very still. I know. He offered to take me with him. I know that too. I told him no, but Adrian, she looked at him. I need you to understand something. I'm choosing you, this life, this brutal, impossible, freezing life. But I'm also terrified I'm making a mistake, and I need you to be okay with that terror, to not see it as doubt in you, but as honest fear about something that's actually terrifying. I can do that. Can you? Because when I showed fear before, you accused me of planning to run. Adrian closed his eyes. You're right. I'm sorry. I'm so used to controlling everything that when I can't control your certainty, I panic. But you deserve better than my panic. You deserve... He opened his eyes. You deserve a partner who trusts your strength even when you doubt it yourself. Can you be that partner? I can try. That's all I can promise. I'll try every day for the rest of our lives if you'll let me. Eleanor leaned forward, rested her forehead against his. I want to say yes. I want to marry you and build this life and prove everyone wrong about us. But I need more than try. I need guaranteed trust, guaranteed respect, guaranteed partnership where my fear isn't treated as weakness. Then you have it, all of it, whatever you need. Including time? Adrian pulled back slightly. What? I need time. Not to run, not to reconsider, but to actually understand what I'm committing to earn the respect of your people honestly, not just through one emergency, to know for certain that I can survive Yorkshire winter and estate management and being your Duchess without losing myself completely. How much time? The winter. Let me stay here through the winter. Let me work beside you, learn from Mrs. Bramwell, prove to your tenants and to myself that I can actually do this. Eleanor's voice strengthened, and if I survive the winter, if I can handle the worst Yorkshire has to offer, then we marry in the spring. Adrian was quiet for a long time. Eleanor watched emotions war across his face, fear of losing her, respect for her courage, understanding of what she was asking. The winter, he said finally. You want to endure a Yorkshire winter before committing. Yes. That's not a small ask, Eleanor. Winter here is brutal, isolating, hard in ways you can't imagine. I know, that's the point. And if you can't handle it, if December comes and you realize you made a mistake, then I leave, and you let me go without a fight. The words hung between them like a blade. You're serious, Adrian said, completely. This is your final test, for both of us. Yes. Adrian looked at her, really looked at her, and Eleanor saw him making the same calculation she'd made. Risk versus reward, fear versus hope, the possibility of loss against the certainty of gaining something worth keeping. Okay, he said finally. Okay? Stay the winter. Prove yourself. Prove us. And if you survive, if we survive, we marry in spring. He took both her hands. But Eleanor, I need you to promise me something. What? If you decide to leave, tell me. Don't just disappear. Don't run to Julian Harrow or London or anywhere else without giving me the chance to understand why. Promise me honesty, even if it destroys me. Eleanor felt her throat tighten. I promise. Then we have a deal. They sealed it with a kiss, gentle, careful, weighted with everything they weren't saying. When they broke apart, Eleanor felt something shift. Not certainty. Not yet. But possibility. The beginning of understanding that maybe, possibly, they could survive this. The next morning, Eleanor stood at her window and watched Julian Harrow's carriage roll away through fresh snow. He didn't look back, didn't send a message, just left, taking the easy escape with him. Eleanor turned away from the window and found Adrian standing in her doorway. He's gone, she said. I know. Do you hate me for considering his offer? No, I'm terrified you'll reconsider it, but I don't hate you. Adrian stepped into the room. Ready to start earning your place? What did you have in mind? Mrs. Bramwell needs help managing winter supply distribution. The tenants need someone to arbitrate a land dispute. The livestock need checking for disease. And I need a partner who can handle all of it without breaking. Eleanor smiled. That sounds absolutely terrible. It is. Welcome to Yorkshire. They spent the day working side by side, Eleanor learning record-keeping from Mrs. Bramwell, Adrian teaching her the intricacies of tenant relationships. By evening, Eleanor's head spun with information and her body ached from unfamiliar work. But she felt alive, really alive. Not performing for society or playing a role, actually doing something that mattered. That night, after a dinner eaten in comfortable silence, Eleanor retired to her room and wrote a letter to her mother. The words came slowly, carefully chosen. Mother, I won't be returning to London this winter. I'm staying at Blackmoor Hall, learning what it means to be a duchess. Not the decorative kind, the real kind. The kind who survives. I know you won't understand, but I need you to trust that I'm making the right choice. I'll write when I can. Eleanor. She sealed it, sent it with the morning post, and felt the last thread connecting her to her old life snap. She was committed now, for better or worse. Yorkshire winter would either forge her into something stronger or break her completely. 2 weeks later, the real winter arrived. It came overnight, temperature dropping so fast that water froze in its jugs, and breathing outside felt like inhaling knives. Snow fell in sheets, burying roads, cutting off the hall from everything except the nearest tenant farms. And with the snow came the true test. Food supplies ran lower than expected. A roof collapsed under snow weight, leaving a family homeless. Livestock started dying from cold. And through it all, Eleanor worked. She helped redistribute supplies. Using mathematics her tutors had taught her to calculate ratios. She organized shelter for the displaced family, fierce enough that even Mrs. Bramwell looked impressed. She stood beside Adrian in freezing barns, learning to identify sick animals and make hard choices about which ones to save. And slowly, painfully slowly, the tenants' attitude shifted. The suspicious looks became cautious respect. The muttered doubts became grudging acknowledgement. The London girl was surviving. Actually, surviving. But survival had a cost. Eleanor lost weight she couldn't afford to lose. Her hands developed calluses. Her skin cracked from constant cold. She woke each morning exhausted and went to bed each night more exhausted. The isolation pressed in like physical weight. No London parties, no society friends, no escape from the relentless demands of simply staying alive. 3 weeks into real winter, she broke. It happened in the hall's kitchen while helping prepare supplies for distribution. Eleanor was counting sacks of grain when her vision blurred, her knees buckled, and she went down hard on the stone floor. When she woke, she was in her bed with Mrs. Bramwell glaring down at her. "Stupid girl," the housekeeper said. "Working yourself to exhaustion. What good are you dead?" "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You're running on nothing but pride and fear of failure." Mrs. Bramwell sat heavily in the chair beside the bed. "I'm going to tell you something, and you're going to listen. Can you do that?" Eleanor nodded mutely. "You don't have to prove yourself every single minute of every single day. That's not strength. That's desperation." The housekeeper's expression softened slightly. "I've watched duchesses come and go for 40 years. Most of them lasted a season before running back to London. You've lasted longer than any of them. You've worked harder, cared more, but if you keep pushing like this, you'll break. And broken duchesses are no use to anyone." "I can't afford to break. If I show weakness, then you show weakness. Better that than collapsing dead in a field somewhere because you were too stubborn to admit you're human." Eleanor felt tears start. "I'm so tired." "I know. And scared. And I miss London and my mother and knowing what I'm supposed to do at any given moment. That's called being alive, girl. It's supposed to be hard. But what if I can't? You can. But not alone." Mrs. Bramwell stood. "The Duke is waiting outside. He's been there for 3 hours. Let him in, or I'll do it for you." She left before Eleanor could protest. A moment later, Adrian entered, looking nearly as exhausted as Eleanor felt. "You fainted," he said. "I'm aware." "Mrs. Bramwell says you've been working 18-hour days. Someone has to." "Not at the cost of your health." Adrian sat on the edge of the bed. "Eleanor, this isn't what I wanted. You proving yourself until you collapse." "Then what did you want?" "I wanted you to understand the life. Not kill yourself trying to earn approval from people who already respect you." Eleanor stared at him. "They don't respect me." "Yes, they do. They have for weeks. But you're so busy trying to prove something that you can't see it." Adrian took her hand. "Do you know what the tenants call you?" "The London girl?" "The flame. Because you bring warmth even in the coldest moments. Because you fight like fire when anyone needs defending. Because you've burned away every doubt anyone had about your strength." His voice roughened. "Everyone sees it except you." Eleanor felt something crack in her chest. "I'm terrified of failing." "I know." "Of becoming everything Julian warned me about. Losing myself. Disappearing into duty." "Then don't. Don't disappear. Keep fighting. Keep burning." "But Eleanor," Adrian leaned forward, "let me help you. Let Mrs. Bramwell help you. Let the people who already love and respect you actually support you instead of watching you destroy yourself trying to earn something you already have." The tears came then, hot and unstoppable. Adrian pulled her against him, and Eleanor cried into his shirt for the first time since arriving in Yorkshire. Cried for the exhaustion and fear and bone-deep loneliness of the past month. Cried for the woman she'd been and the woman she was becoming, and the terrifying gap between them. "I don't know how to do this," she sobbed. "Neither do I. We'll figure it out together." "Promise?" "Promise." They stayed like that until Eleanor's tears stopped, until her breathing steadied, until the weight pressing down on her eased slightly. "I need to rest," she said finally. "You need to rest for 3 days. Mrs. Bramwell's orders." "I can't." "You can. The estate won't collapse without you for 72 hours. I've managed it for years." "But rest, Eleanor. That's not a request. That's your Duke giving you a direct order." Adrian smiled slightly. "For once, listen to me." Eleanor wanted to argue, but her body had other ideas. She was asleep before Adrian left the room. The 3 days of rest saved her life. Eleanor slept more than she'd slept in weeks, ate food Mrs. Bramwell brought with military precision, and slowly felt strength return to her exhausted body. On the 4th day, she emerged from her room to find the hall transformed. Someone, probably Mrs. Bramwell, had organized a celebration. The servants had brought in greenery despite the snow. The fireplaces roared with extra warmth, and in the great hall, tenant families gathered for the winter solstice celebration Eleanor had helped Adrian plan weeks ago. "You came," Adrian said, appearing at her side. "I can't let you do this alone." "You already did all the work. I'm just executing your plan." Eleanor looked around at the families eating, children playing, the warmth and light pushing back against winter darkness. "Did I really plan this?" "Every detail. Food distribution, entertainment rotation, even the greenery placement. You did it 3 weeks ago and then apparently forgot because you were too busy collapsing from exhaustion." "Oh," Adrian took her hand. "Come on, your people want to thank you." "My people?" "Yes, yours." He led her into the crowd, and what happened next would stay with Eleanor for the rest of her life. One by one, the tenant families approached, thanked her for saving their children during the flood, for fair supply distribution, for shelter and support, and simply caring when most duchesses wouldn't. "You're one of us now," an old farmer said, gripping her hand with calloused fingers. "The flame of Blackmoor. Winter can't break you." Eleanor looked at Adrian, who was smiling that rare, genuine smile that transformed his face. Then at the families surrounding them. Then at Mrs. Bramwell, who actually looked pleased, and for the first time since arriving in Yorkshire, Eleanor felt it. Not certainty. Not yet. But something close. The beginning of belonging. The start of home. The celebration lasted into the night. Eleanor danced with tenant farmers, played with children, and slowly felt the last of her London self burn away. What remained was someone harder, stronger, forged by winter into something capable of surviving it. Near midnight, Adrian found her on the same balcony where they'd argued weeks ago. "Tired?" he asked. "Exhausted, but the good kind." "There's a good kind of exhausted?" "When it comes from building something instead of just trying to survive." Eleanor leaned against the balcony rail. "I think I understand now." "Understand what?" "What you meant about Yorkshire. About this life. It's not about controlling everything. It's about accepting that you can't control anything except how you respond." Adrian moved beside her. "That took me 5 years to learn. You managed it in 6 weeks. I had a good teacher." "You had your own strength. I just helped you see it." They stood in comfortable silence, watching snow fall over frozen fields. Somewhere in the hall behind them, people celebrated. In front of them, winter stretched endless and brutal, but Eleanor wasn't afraid anymore. "I'll marry you," she said quietly. Adrian went very still. "What?" "In the spring, when winter ends. I'll marry you." "You're sure?" "No, but I'm sure enough. And I think that's all we get. Certainty's a myth. But partnership? That's real. And I want that. With you." Adrian turned her to face him, hands gentle on her shoulders. "You've survived the test?" "I've survived the test. Now you have to survive my mother planning the wedding." He actually laughed. "That might be harder than winter." "Definitely harder than winter." They kissed there on the balcony, sealing their future with frozen breath and warm hearts. When they broke apart, Eleanor was smiling. "One question," Adrian said. "What?" "The flame of Blackmoor. Did you know that's what they call you?" "Not until tonight. And I think I like it better than Duchess." "Good, because you're both, and I—" His voice caught. "I love you, all of you. The London girl who walked into winter, and the flame who survived it." Eleanor kissed him again, tasting snowflakes and promise. Behind them, the celebration continued. In front of them, winter still raged. But they'd survive the worst of it, together. And in spring, they'd marry, if they lived that long. Because winter in Yorkshire wasn't done with them yet. Not by a long shot. And what came next would test everything they'd built. Everything. The storm that nearly killed them came 2 weeks after the solstice celebration. It started as a whisper of wind that turned the morning brittle and strange. Eleanor was in the estate office with Adrian going over grain reserves when Mrs. Bramwell appeared in the doorway with an expression that made Eleanor's stomach drop. "Storm coming," the housekeeper said. "Bad one. The old-timers say it'll be the worst in 30 years. Adrian was already moving, pulling maps from drawers, his face shifting into that mask of ducal control. How long do we have? 6 hours. Maybe 8 if we're lucky. We're never lucky. He looked at Eleanor. Can you handle supply distribution to the nearest farms? I need to secure the livestock and reinforce the tenant cottages. Eleanor stood, pushing aside the fear that wanted to paralyze her. What do I tell them? That anyone who can make it to the hall should come now. Anyone who can't needs to barricade themselves in and pray the roofs hold. That's comforting. It's honest. Adrian grabbed his heavy coat. Mrs. Bramwell will help you organize. I'll be back before the storm hits. He was gone before Eleanor could argue. She turned to find the housekeeper already pulling out supply lists, moving with the efficiency of someone who'd weathered 30 Yorkshire winters and expected to weather 30 more. Right, Mrs. Bramwell said. Here's what we need. The next 6 hours were organized chaos. Eleanor coordinated with the estate steward to load wagons with emergency supplies, food, blankets, medical provisions, firewood. She sent runners to the farthest farms with warnings and evacuation orders. She helped Mrs. Bramwell prepare the hall to house potentially dozens of refugees, converting every available room into shelter. And through it all, she felt the wind picking up, felt the temperature dropping, felt winter gathering itself for one final brutal assault. The first families arrived around noon, dragging children and whatever possessions they could carry. Eleanor met them at the door, directing them to warm rooms, ensuring everyone had food and blankets. More came in waves. Farmers who'd abandoned their cottages, laborers who'd left livestock to fend for themselves, entire families who trusted the Duke's warning enough to leave everything behind. By mid-afternoon, Blackmoor Hall housed 63 people, and the storm still hadn't hit. Adrian returned with the last group, snow already starting to fall in earnest. He looked exhausted, face raw from wind, moving with the careful precision of someone running on willpower alone. Everyone accounted for? He asked Eleanor. Everyone who could make it. The Hendersons refused to leave their farm, said they'd rather die in their own home than abandon it. Adrian's jaw tightened. Fools. Proud fools. There's a difference. Not when pride gets you killed. Before Eleanor could respond, one of the tenant farmers, a man named Thomas, who'd been among the first to call her the Flame, pushed through the crowd. Your Grace, Miss Ashford, we've got a problem. What now? Adrian asked. The western storage barn, the one with half the winter grain supply. The roof's already buckling under the weight of the snow, and the storm hasn't even really started. If it collapses, we lose everything. Eleanor felt the room go quiet. 63 people all holding their breath, waiting to see what their Duke would do. Adrian's face went absolutely blank. How long before it collapses? Hour, maybe less. Can we reinforce it? Not in this wind, not safely. Then we evacuate the grain, move what we can before the roof goes. Thomas shifted uncomfortably. Your Grace, with respect, that's suicide. The wind alone could knock a man off his feet. Add in the weight of grain sacks, the ice, the cold. I didn't ask for your opinion on the risk. I asked if we can move the grain. We can try, but we'll need every able man, and even then we start now. Adrian was already moving toward the door. Eleanor, stay here. Coordinate. No. He stopped, turned. What? No, I'm not staying here while you risk your life moving grain. Eleanor stepped forward. You need every able body, you said. I'm able. You're not trained for this kind of... Neither were you when you started. I'm coming. Adrian looked like he wanted to argue, but Mrs. Bramwell's voice cut through the tension. Let her go, Your Grace. The girls survived this long by being stubborn. No reason to stop her now. Adrian's expression did something complicated. Then he nodded once, sharp. Fine, but you follow orders exactly. No heroics, understand? Perfectly. They assembled a team of 20, every man strong enough to work, and 3 women, including Eleanor, who refused to be left behind. The walk to the western barn was brutal. Wind hit like fists, snow already accumulating fast enough to make each step treacherous. By the time they reached the barn, Eleanor could barely feel her face. Inside, the situation was worse than described. The roof groaned audibly, timbers creaking under impossible weight. Snow sifted through gaps in the boards, creating drifts around the mountains of grain sacks stacked to the rafters. "We move in teams of 4, Adrian shouted over the wind. 2 to load, 2 to carry. Get as much to the hall as possible before the roof goes. Move." They moved. Eleanor partnered with Thomas and 2 other farmers, forming a chain that loaded, carried, and returned in brutal repetition. The grain sacks weighed more than she'd expected, 50 pounds each, at least, and carrying them through deepening snow while wind tried to tear her off her feet required every ounce of strength she had. After the first trip, her shoulders screamed. After the 5th, she'd stopped feeling her hands. After the 10th, she was operating on pure stubbornness and the knowledge that stopping meant people starved. "You're bleeding," Thomas said during one return trip. Eleanor looked down. Her hands had cracked open, blood mixing with snow. "I'm fine." "You're not fine. I said I'm fine." She grabbed another sack, gritting her teeth against the pain. "Keep moving." Around her, the other workers exchanged glances. She saw respect there, mixed with concern, but nobody tried to stop her. The flame of Blackmoor didn't quit, even when she probably should. They'd evacuated maybe half the grain when the roof made a sound like a gunshot. "Out!" Adrian's voice cut through everything. "Everyone out now!" The evacuation was chaos. People scrambled for the door, dropping sacks, running through snow that was now knee-deep. Eleanor was near the back, weighed down by the grain sack she'd been carrying, when her foot caught on something and she went down hard. The world became snow and pain. She tried to get up, but the grain sack pinned her, too heavy to shift quickly. Around her, people kept running. The roof groaned again, louder. Then hands grabbed her arms, hauling her up with brutal efficiency. Adrian, he'd come back for her, was pulling her toward the door even as timbers started to crack above them. They made it 3 steps before the center section of the roof collapsed. The sound was catastrophic, wood splintering, snow cascading, metal shrieking as support beams twisted. Adrian threw Eleanor toward the door and she stumbled through, hitting the snow outside hard enough to knock the air from her lungs. Behind her, she heard another crash. Bigger. Final. "Adrian!" She scrambled up, turning back toward the barn. The entire structure had collapsed inward, roof caved completely, walls buckling, snow and debris still settling, and no sign of Adrian. "No!" Eleanor started toward the wreckage. "No, no, no!" Strong hands caught her, Thomas and another farmer, holding her back. "Miss Eleanor, you can't— Let me go!" She fought them, terror giving her strength. "He's in there, let me— The whole thing's unstable. You go in now, you'll die too." "I don't care." The scream tore out of her. "Adrian!" For 3 seconds that lasted forever, there was nothing. Just wind and snow and the settling wreckage and Eleanor's world ending. Then movement. A section of debris shifted, boards falling aside, and Adrian emerged from the collapsed barn like something rising from its own grave. He was covered in snow and blood, limping badly, but alive. Eleanor broke free of the hands holding her and ran. Hit Adrian hard enough to nearly knock them both over, arms wrapping around him with desperate strength. "You idiot!" she sobbed into his chest. "You absolute idiot! I thought— I'm okay." His voice was rough. "I'm okay, Eleanor. You're bleeding. Just cuts. Nothing serious. You could have died." "But I didn't." He pulled back enough to look at her face. "We need to get back to the hall. Storm's getting worse." He was right. The wind had picked up to a scream, snow falling so thick Eleanor could barely see 10 feet. They regrouped the workers, everyone accounted for miraculously, and started the trek back. It took an hour to cover the distance that had taken 15 minutes on the way out. The wind fought them every step, snowdrifts building faster than they could push through. Twice, people fell and had to be hauled up. Once, Eleanor lost sight of Adrian entirely and nearly panicked before he appeared through the whiteout, still moving, still leading. When Blackmoor Hall finally emerged through the snow, Eleanor wanted to weep with relief. Inside, Mrs. Bramwell took one look at them and started barking orders. The workers were stripped of wet clothes, wrapped in blankets, given hot food and stronger drink. Adrian was dragged away by the estate physician despite his protests, and Eleanor found herself in front of the fire with her ruined hands wrapped in bandages and Mrs. Bramwell glaring at her. "Stupid girl," the housekeeper said, "working until you bled. We saved half the grain, and nearly got your Duke killed doing it. He came back for me. That was his choice." "Of course he did. The man's in love with you, makes people do stupid things. Mrs. Bramwell's expression softened fractionally. But you saved a lot of lives today. The grain you evacuated will feed families through the worst of winter. That matters. Eleanor looked at her bandaged hands. It doesn't feel like enough. It never does. That's how you know you're doing it right. The storm raged for 3 days. 3 days where the wind screamed and snow piled higher than the ground floor windows, and everyone trapped in the hall existed in a strange limbo between survival and terror. They rationed the food carefully, kept fires going constantly, and tried not to think about what they'd find when the storm finally ended. Eleanor spent those 3 days working, organizing food distribution, keeping children entertained, helping Mrs. Bramwell manage the logistics of housing 60-plus people in a space designed for maybe 20. She barely slept, running on adrenaline and the knowledge that stopping meant falling apart. Adrian worked alongside her, though the physician had ordered him to rest. His ribs were bruised, possibly cracked, from the barn collapse. He moved carefully, wincing with each breath, but refused to stop. On the second night, Eleanor found him alone in his study, staring at maps of the estate. "You should be sleeping," she said. "So should you." "I asked first." Adrian smiled slightly. "Fair." He set down the map. "Come here." Eleanor crossed to him. He pulled her onto his lap carefully, mindful of both their injuries, and they sat there in silence while the storm raged outside. "I've been thinking," Adrian said finally. "That's usually dangerous. About what happens after, when the storm ends and we assess the damage. And I think we need to change how we manage the estates. The old system, centralized grain storage, individual family responsibility. It's not working. We nearly lost everything because one roof failed." Eleanor straightened slightly. "What are you proposing?" "Distributed storage, multiple smaller sites instead of one large one. Shared responsibility across families instead of each one operating independently. Basically, rebuild the entire structure of how we survive winter. That would require convincing every tenant family to change everything they know. Yes, they'll fight you. Probably. Unless..." Eleanor stopped, an idea forming. Unless what? Unless the person proposing the change isn't you. Unless it comes from someone they've already learned to trust. Someone who proved herself in the flood and the storm and every crisis in between. Adrian looked at her. "You want to lead this?" "I think I have to. You're the Duke. They respect your authority, but they also resent it. She gestured at herself. "I'm the Flame, the London girl who survived winter. If I tell them we need to change, they might actually listen. This could backfire spectacularly." "I know. You'd be putting yourself in direct opposition to how things have been done for generations." "I know that too. And if it works, if you actually convince them to restructure everything, you'll have more power over this estate than most duchesses dream of." Eleanor met his eyes. "Does that scare you?" Adrian was quiet for a long moment. Then, "No, it makes me love you more." They kissed there in the study, gentle and careful, while outside the storm tried to tear the world apart. When the storm finally broke on the 4th day, what they found was devastating. 3 tenant cottages completely destroyed, the western barn in ruins, livestock losses in the dozens, crops buried under snow that would take weeks to melt, and the Hendersons, the family that had refused to evacuate, dead in their collapsed home. Eleanor stood in the snow, looking at the wreckage of the Henderson cottage, and felt something harden in her chest. This was the cost of pride, of refusing to adapt, of clinging to old ways even when those ways killed you. "We're going to change this," she told Adrian. "I know. All of it. The system that let this happen. I know." He took her bandaged hand carefully. "But we do it together." The first meeting happened a week later after the worst of the cleanup. Eleanor stood in front of 40 tenant families crammed into the hall's great room, her hands still bandaged, her voice steady despite the nerves threatening to choke her. "Most of you know me," she started. "The London girl, the Flame, the woman who fainted in a kitchen and nearly got crushed in a barn collapse. I'm not going to pretend I'm one of you. I wasn't born here. I didn't grow up with Yorkshire winters. 6 months ago, I'd never seen real snow. Silence. Faces watching her, suspicious and curious in equal measure. But I've learned something these past months. I've learned that survival here isn't about individual strength. It's about collective resilience. And our current system, the way we store food, manage resources, prepare for winter, it's killing us. A murmur ran through the crowd. Eleanor pushed forward. The Hendersons died because they tried to survive alone. We nearly lost half our grain because we centralized all our storage in one vulnerable location. Every winter, families suffer because we're operating as individuals instead of as a community. That's how it's always been done, someone called out. One of the older farmers, face weathered by decades of Yorkshire weather. And how many people have died because that's how it's always been done? Eleanor shot back. How many families have starved? How many children have frozen? How many roofs have collapsed while everyone else watched and called it pride? The silence that followed felt dangerous. I'm proposing we change everything, Eleanor said. Distributed grain storage across multiple sites, shared resource pools that everyone contributes to and draws from, mandatory evacuation protocols for severe weather, collective responsibility instead of individual survival. That's socialism, another voice said, disgusted. That's surviving, Eleanor corrected. Call it whatever you want. I call it not watching our neighbors die while we pretend we're being strong. Thomas stood up from the crowd. Miss Eleanor saved my children during the flood. Worked until her hands bled moving grain. Nearly died in that barn trying to save our food supply. I'll listen to what she has to say. Another farmer stood, then another. Within minutes, half the room was on its feet. This isn't a vote, Eleanor said. I'm not asking your permission. I'm telling you what's going to happen. The Duke and I are restructuring how this estate operates. You can participate and help shape it, or you can resist and get left behind. But either way, change is coming. The meeting dissolved into argument. Families debating, voices rising, old grudges surfacing alongside new alliances. Eleanor let them fight it out, knowing that consensus built through conflict lasted longer than consensus imposed from above. Adrian found her afterward watching the families stream out of the hall into weak winter sunlight. That was risky, he said. It was necessary. Half of them think you're a revolutionary. The other half think you're insane. What do you think? Adrian pulled her close, careful of her injuries. I think you just became more powerful than any duchess in Yorkshire history. And I think I'm terrified of how much I want to see what you do with that power. Good, Eleanor said. Terror keeps you honest. Over the next month, Eleanor's revolution took shape. She worked with Thomas and the progressive farmers to design the new system, mapping distributed storage sites, calculating resource pools, establishing evacuation protocols. She faced down the conservative faction who called her changes dangerous and radical. She negotiated, compromised, and when necessary, used the full weight of Adrian's authority to override objections. And slowly, impossibly, it started to work. The first distributed storage site was completed in early February. The second followed a week later. Families who'd operated independently for generations began contributing to collective pools. Evacuation routes were marked, emergency shelters designated, communication systems established. Eleanor was exhausted, running on 3 hours of sleep, and Mrs. Bramwell's increasingly pointed suggestions that she rest. But she couldn't stop. Not when she could see the system taking shape, could feel the estate transforming from a collection of isolated families into something approaching a real community. The test came in late February, when another storm threatened. This one wasn't as severe as the January monster, but it was bad enough. Eleanor watched the sky darken and felt the old fear rise. Then she pushed it down and started implementing the protocols they'd spent weeks building. Evacuation orders went out, families moved to designated shelters without argument. Supplies were distributed from multiple storage sites instead of one vulnerable location. And when the storm hit, everyone survived. Not easily, not comfortably, but alive. The morning after, Eleanor stood in the great room surrounded by families who'd weathered the storm using her system and saw something change in their eyes. The suspicion was gone. The doubt had vanished. What remained was respect, real, earned, unshakable respect. "The flame of Blackmoor," one of the old farmers said, approaching her with his hat in his hands. "You've changed everything, changed us." "We changed it together," Eleanor said. No. He shook his head. You had the courage to say what needed saying, to demand what needed demanding. That's leadership, Miss Eleanor. Real leadership. Over the next week, similar conversations happened dozens of times. Families thanking her, asking her advice, treating her not as the Duke's future wife, but as a leader in her own right. The power shift was subtle but unmistakable. When disputes arose, people came to Eleanor before going to Adrian. When decisions needed making, they wanted her input. When winter threw its final challenges, they looked to the flame for guidance. Adrian noticed, of course. He'd have been blind not to. You've effectively become co-ruler of this estate, he said one evening. They were in his study, going over reports, the work never quite ending. Does that bother you? No. Should it? Most men would be threatened. I'm not most men. Adrian set down his pen. Eleanor, I've spent 5 years managing this estate alone, carrying all the weight, making all the decisions, being the only thing standing between these families and catastrophe. I'm exhausted. Having someone to share that burden with, someone these people actually trust and respect, it's not threatening, it's relief. Even if that someone is your future wife? Especially because that someone is my future wife. He stood, crossed to her, pulled her up into a careful embrace. I told you I wanted a partner, equals. This is what that looks like. Eleanor leaned into him, feeling the solid warmth of his body, the steady beat of his heart. We're really doing this. We're really doing this. Building something new, together. Terrifying, isn't it? Absolutely. They stood there in the quiet study while outside, winter slowly began its retreat. The days were getting longer, the snow starting to melt. Spring approaching with its promise of new beginnings. Eleanor's decision to stay the winter had been a test, a way to prove she could survive the worst Yorkshire had to offer. But somewhere along the way, it had become something else. Not just survival, but transformation. Not just enduring, but leading. Not just loving Adrian, but becoming someone worthy of standing beside him. We should write to your mother, Adrian said. Tell her the wedding is definitely happening. Spring, as promised. She's going to lose her mind planning it. Probably. It'll be a spectacle. London society, Yorkshire tenants, everyone watching to see if the flame of Blackmoor can actually pull off being a duchess. Can you? Eleanor pulled back enough to look at his face. Yes. Not the decorative kind, not the kind that smiles and waves and stays quiet, but a duchess who leads, who changes things, who burns. That's the only kind I want. They sealed it with a kiss that tasted like promise and possibility, and the beginning of something neither of them fully understood yet. The letter to Lady Ashford went out the next morning, along with formal wedding announcements to London society. Eleanor could imagine her mother's reaction, delight mixed with terror, pride mixed with anxiety about what her daughter had become in the frozen north. But Eleanor didn't care. For the first time in her life, she knew exactly who she was and what she wanted. The London girl was gone, burned away by winter. What remained was the flame, and she was ready to set the entire aristocratic world on fire. 2 weeks before the wedding was scheduled, Julian Harrow returned. Eleanor was in the village supervising the final touches on a new communal storage facility when she saw him. He rode in with a small retinue, looking exactly as she remembered. Handsome, charming, easy in his skin in a way Adrian had never quite managed. He found her knee-deep in construction plans, covered in sawdust, arguing with a carpenter about load-bearing walls. Eleanor Ashford, he said. Or should I say, the flame of Blackmoor. She turned, surprised. Julian, what are you doing here? I live here, remember? Or did you forget about your neighbor during your winter of transformation? I've been busy. So I hear. He dismounted, approached slowly. The whole of Yorkshire is talking about what you've done. Revolutionized an entire estate system. Turned tenant farmers into believers. Became more powerful than most actual duchesses. That's an exaggeration. Is it? Because from where I'm standing, you've accomplished more in 6 months than most people manage in a lifetime. Eleanor felt something twist in her chest. Pride, maybe. Or the memory of the woman she'd been, who'd considered Julian's offer of escape. Why are you really here? She asked. Julian's smile faded. I wanted to see if you were happy. Really happy. not just surviving happy. Eleanor stopped, considered. I'm building something. With Adrian. Something real and hard and worth doing. That's not the same as easy happiness, but it's mine. And that's enough? Yes. Julian nodded slowly. Then I'm happy for you, truly. He remounted his horse. For what it's worth, I was wrong. About Adrian. About what marrying him would do to you. You didn't disappear into duty. You set duty on fire and made it work for you instead. Thank you. But Eleanor, he looked down at her, expression serious. Don't ever let that fire go out. The moment you stop burning, the moment you accept things as they are, instead of demanding they be better, that's when you lose. I won't. Promise? I promise. Julian rode away, and Eleanor watched him go without regret. He'd been right about some things. The danger of losing herself, the weight of duty, the risk of becoming just another aristocratic wife. But he'd been wrong about the solution. Running wasn't the answer. Fighting was. Burning was. That night, Eleanor told Adrian about Julian's visit. How did it feel? He asked. Seeing him again? Like closing a door I'd already walked through. He was a possibility that doesn't exist anymore. No regrets? None. Adrian pulled her close, and they stood at the window of his study, looking out over the estate they were rebuilding together. Snow still covered the fields, but Eleanor could see green underneath. Spring coming, new life preparing to break through. 2 weeks, Adrian said. 2 weeks until I become your Duchess. Terrified? Absolutely. You? Out of my mind. He kissed the top of her head. But I've learned that terror just means something matters, and you matter more than anything. Eleanor turned in his arms, looked up at his face, this man who'd learned to be human for her, who'd trusted her with power, who'd become her partner in every way that mattered. I love you, she said. I love you too. My flame. 2 weeks later, under a spring sky finally clear of snow, Eleanor Ashford married Adrian Blackmoor in front of an audience that included London aristocracy and Yorkshire tenant farmers in equal measure. She wore a dress that cost a fortune and boots practical enough to walk through mud. She promised to love and honor, but not obey. And when the vicar pronounced them married, the cheer that went up came not from society ladies, but from the families who'd learned to trust the flame. The reception lasted into the night, a celebration that mixed classes in a way that made traditional aristocrats uncomfortable and progressive reformers delighted. Eleanor danced with her new husband, with tenant farmers, with her mother who'd made the journey north and looked simultaneously proud and bewildered. And as midnight approached, as the celebration continued around them, Adrian pulled Eleanor aside. Happy? He asked. Eleanor looked around at the life they'd built, the community they'd forged, the future spreading out before them like uncharted territory. Yes, she said, not easy happy, not simple happy, but real happy, the kind that burns. Good, Adrian said, because we're just getting started. Eleanor smiled, fierce and wild and absolutely certain. The aristocrat who'd walked into winter had become the Duchess who set it on fire, and she wasn't done burning yet. Not even close. 3 years after Eleanor became Duchess of Blackmoor, the Prime Minister came to Yorkshire. He arrived in early autumn, when the hills were gold and red and the air carried the first whisper of coming winter. His carriage rolled through gates that now bore new ironwork, commissioned by Eleanor, designed by local craftsmen, depicting flames intertwined with traditional Blackmoor symbols. The message was unmistakable. This estate belonged to both its history and its future. Eleanor met him in the Great Hall, dressed in deep burgundy wool cut in a style that was neither London fashion nor Yorkshire practicality, but something uniquely her own. Adrian stood beside her, a united front, though everyone knew the Prime Minister hadn't traveled 6 hours from London to see the Duke. Your Grace, the Prime Minister said, bowing to Eleanor with the kind of respect usually reserved for royalty. The flame of Blackmoor. Your reputation precedes you. Does it? Eleanor's voice was pleasant. And what does my reputation say? That you've accomplished the impossible, transformed one of England's most traditional estates into a model of progressive reform. That tenant mortality has dropped by 60%. that your distributed resource system has been studied by agricultural ministers across Europe, that you've proven collective responsibility and aristocratic power can coexist. We've worked hard, Eleanor said. Is that why you're here? To complement our farming techniques? The Prime Minister smiled thinly. I'm here because Parliament is considering sweeping agricultural reforms, land redistribution, tenant rights legislation, changes that would fundamentally alter how estates like yours operate. And there are two camps, those who think reform will destroy the aristocracy, and those who think the aristocracy needs destroying. You've proven a third option exists. Adrian's hand found Eleanor's back, a gesture that had become automatic. What are you asking? For the Duchess to come to London, to testify before Parliament, to show them that change doesn't mean chaos, that reform doesn't require revolution. The Prime Minister looked directly at Eleanor. Your voice could shift the entire debate, could save the landed gentry from themselves. Eleanor felt something cold settle in her stomach. You want me to defend the aristocracy. I want you to defend what you've built. The system you've created, it proves that power can be wielded responsibly. That tradition and progress aren't enemies. Parliament needs to see that. And if I refuse, then the radical faction wins. Land gets seized, estates get broken up. Everything you've built here gets swept away in the name of equality. The Prime Minister's expression was grave. I'm not exaggerating. The votes are close. Your testimony could be the difference. After he left, Eleanor stood at the window of Adrian's study, watching the Prime Minister's carriage disappear down the road. You're thinking too hard, Adrian said. I'm thinking the right amount. Eleanor turned to face him. He wants me to save the aristocracy, the same system that would have turned me into decorative furniture, that kills women like Julian's sister, that lets people freeze to death rather than admit old ways might be wrong. He wants you to save what we've built. There's a difference. It does. Is there? Because standing in front of Parliament and defending aristocratic power, even reformed aristocratic power, means propping up a system that's fundamentally unjust. Adrian crossed to her, took her hands. 3 years of marriage had taught him when to push and when to listen. This was a listening moment. What do you want to do? He asked. I want to burn the whole thing down and start over. Do you? Eleanor was quiet for a long time. No. I want to save what's worth saving and destroy what isn't. I just don't know if I can do that in front of Parliament without becoming exactly what I hate, an aristocrat defending aristocracy. Then don't defend aristocracy. Defend people. Defend the tenant families who are thriving under our system. Defend the idea that power exists to serve, not to rule. Adrian's grip tightened. Eleanor, you've spent 3 years proving that leadership means responsibility. Show Parliament what that looks like. And if they twist my words, use my testimony to justify keeping everything else the same, then we fight that battle when it comes. But right now, the choice is simple. Go to London and try to shape reform, or stay here and watch radical change destroy everything we've built. Eleanor looked at him, this man who'd learned to share power, to trust her judgment, to become her true partner. You think I should go? I think you'll regret it if you don't. 2 weeks later, Eleanor stood in the visitors' gallery of Parliament, watching men in expensive suits debate the future of people they'd never met. The arguments were predictable. Conservatives warning that reform meant chaos, radicals demanding complete land redistribution, moderates trying to find middle ground that satisfied no one. Then the speaker called her name. The Duchess of Blackmoor will address Parliament. The chamber went quiet. Eleanor descended to the floor, feeling hundreds of eyes tracking her movement. She'd prepared a speech, worked on it for days with Adrian, but standing here in front of the men who actually controlled England's future, the prepared words felt hollow. So she abandoned them. 3 years ago, she started, voice carrying in the sudden silence, I was a London society girl who'd never seen real winter. I married the Duke of Blackmoor and moved to Yorkshire expecting to become a decorative duchess. Host parties, wear expensive dresses, smile, and stay quiet while men made decisions. A ripple of discomfort went through the conservative faction. Good. Instead, I watched tenant families nearly starve because our grain storage system was designed for convenience, not survival. I watched children freeze because individual pride mattered more than collective warmth. I watched the Hendersons die in their collapsed cottage because asking for help was seen as weakness. The chamber was absolutely silent now. So I changed it. With my husband's support, I restructured how our estate operates, distributed storage instead of centralized vulnerability, shared resources instead of isolated survival, mandatory evacuation protocols that override individual pride. And you know what happened? Eleanor looked around the chamber, meeting eyes, daring anyone to look away. Mortality dropped. Production increased. Families that had been one bad winter away from catastrophe started thriving. Not because I'm special, not because I have some aristocratic wisdom, but because I listened to the people actually living the problem and designed solutions that served them instead of tradition. Your Grace, one of the conservative members interrupted, surely you're not suggesting that tenant farmers should dictate estate policy. I'm suggesting that people who work the land might know something about farming that men in London parlors don't. Eleanor's voice went cold. I'm suggesting that power exists to serve those it governs, not the other way around. And I'm suggesting that any aristocrat who can't understand that doesn't deserve their position. The chamber erupted, conservatives shouting objections, radicals cheering, moderates trying to restore order. Eleanor stood in the center of it all and felt something shift. You want to know what reform should look like? She raised her voice over the chaos. It should look like accountability. Every estate required to report tenant mortality, crop yields, living conditions, public record, available to anyone. It should look like mandatory resource minimums, no tenant family allowed to fall below basic survival needs, enforced by law. It should look like giving tenants actual representation in estate decisions that affect their lives. That's socialism, someone shouted. That's survival, Eleanor shot back. And if you're more afraid of socialism than of watching families die, then you're the problem, not the solution. The speaker was pounding his gavel, trying to restore order, but Eleanor wasn't finished. The aristocracy doesn't have a divine right to power. We have power because the system gives it to us. And if we can't wield that power responsibly, if we can't adapt to ensure the people we govern actually survive and thrive, then we deserve to lose it. She left the chamber in chaos, walked out before anyone could stop her, and made it to the visitors' corridor before her knees started shaking. Adrian was waiting there, having watched from the gallery. He pulled her into an alcove, held her while she tried to remember how to breathe. I think I just destroyed any chance of moderate reform, she said. You told the truth. The conservatives hate me. The radicals probably think I didn't go far enough, and the moderates are terrified. Good. Fear means they're paying attention. Adrian pulled back to look at her face. Eleanor, you just gave the most radical speech that chamber has heard in decades. From a duchess. You shattered every expectation of what aristocratic women are supposed to be. I might have made everything worse. Or you might have changed everything. The aftermath was explosive. London newspapers ran competing headlines. Duchess calls for aristocratic accountability versus radical flame threatens traditional values. Society was divided between those who thought Eleanor had betrayed her class and those who saw her as the future. Parliament descended into weeks of brutal debate, but something had shifted. The moderate faction, terrified of losing all aristocratic power to radical reform, started seriously considering Eleanor's proposals. The idea of accountability measures, resource minimums, tenant representation, it gained traction not because it was popular, but because it was the least radical alternative on the table. Eleanor watched from Yorkshire, where she'd returned immediately after testifying. She worked with Adrian to refine their estate systems further, welcomed visits from other progressive landowners wanting to learn, and tried not to think about the political wildfire she'd started. 3 months after her testimony, the Reform Act passed. It wasn't everything Eleanor had proposed. The accountability measures were watered down, the enforcement mechanisms weak, the tenant representation advisory rather than binding. But it was something, a foothold, a legal framework that said aristocratic power came with responsibility, and failure to meet that responsibility had consequences. The night the act passed, Eleanor and Adrian stood on the same balcony where they'd first argued, looking out over snow-covered fields that held families who were safer, warmer, better fed than they'd been 4 years ago. We did it, Adrian said. We started it, Eleanor corrected. This is just the beginning. Planning another revolution? Always. Adrian laughed, pulled her close. That's my Duchess. Never satisfied. Always burning. They stood there in comfortable silence, and Eleanor thought about the woman she'd been. The London girl, who'd been so afraid of losing herself in marriage, so terrified of becoming another suffocated aristocratic wife. That woman was gone, burned away by winter, and forged into something harder, stronger, sharper. But the real test came 6 months later, when the neighboring Duke of Thornbury died and his estate descended into chaos. Thornbury had been everything Blackmoor wasn't: traditional, harsh, resistant to any change. The old Duke had ruled his tenants like a tyrant, and when he died suddenly, the estate collapsed. No succession plan, no distributed resources, no community structure. Just chaos and desperate families. The new Duke, Thornbury's nephew, barely 20 and completely unprepared, sent a desperate plea to Blackmoor for help. Eleanor read the letter twice, then looked at Adrian. If we help them, we're committing to months of work, restructuring an entire estate, training a new Duke, managing tenant relations in a territory that's hostile to everything we represent. And if we don't help, families suffer, possibly die. And every conservative in England points to Thornbury as proof that reform doesn't work. Then we help, Eleanor smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. The Thornbury project consumed the next 8 months. Eleanor spent more time at the neighboring estate than her own, working with the young Duke to implement everything she'd learned. It was like starting over: suspicious tenants, hostile traditionalists, systems so broken that fixing them felt impossible. But Eleanor had learned something in Yorkshire. Nothing was actually impossible, just hard. She brought Mrs. Bramwell to help reorganize Thornbury's household. She recruited Thomas and other Blackmoor farmers to teach distributed storage techniques. She used every lesson learned, every mistake overcome, every hard-won piece of knowledge. And slowly, impossibly, Thornbury started to stabilize. The young Duke, a man named Richard who reminded Eleanor of Adrian before he'd learned to be human, fought her at first, resented her authority, hated that a woman was essentially running his estate. 3 months in, they had it out in his study. I don't need a woman telling me how to manage my own land, Richard snapped. Eleanor set down her papers very carefully. Then manage it. Show me you can handle tenant relations, resource distribution, crisis management. Prove you don't need help. I'm the Duke. You're a title, that's all. Until you prove you can actually lead, you're just a man in an expensive house watching people suffer. Richard's face went red. How dare you? I dare because families are dying while you worry about your pride. I dare because I've done this work and you haven't. And I dare because someone needs to tell you the truth. You're failing, and if you keep failing, you don't deserve this estate. The silence that followed was vicious. Then Richard's anger crumbled into something raw. I don't know what I'm doing. I know. I'm terrified I'll make it worse. You will. That's part of learning. Then why? His voice cracked. Why are you helping me? Eleanor's expression softened slightly. Because Adrian was terrified too once. And someone, me, helped him learn to be better. Now I'm doing the same for you. But Richard, you have to actually want to change, not just want the estate to run smoothly, want to be worthy of the power you have. And if I can't be, then you step aside and let someone who can take over. Richard looked at her for a long moment. Then quietly, teach me. So she did. The transformation wasn't instant. Richard made mistakes, struggled with letting go of traditional authority, resisted changes that threatened his ego. But he learned. Slowly, stubbornly, he learned. By the end of 8 months, Thornbury looked like a smaller, rougher version of Blackmoor. Not perfect, not finished, but functioning, stable. Families that had been starving were fed. Systems that had been broken were repaired. And Richard, while still proud and sometimes insufferable, had become something approaching a real leader. The night before Eleanor returned to Blackmoor permanently, Richard found her in Thornbury's library. I wanted to thank you, he said. You don't need to. Yes, I do. You saved this estate, saved me. And you didn't have to. Eleanor smiled. Consider it an investment. The more estates that prove reform works, the harder it is for conservatives to roll back progress. Practical as always. Someone has to be. Richard hesitated, then, There's talk, in London about what you're doing. Some people are calling you the most dangerous woman in England. And what do you call me? The most necessary. Eleanor felt something warm settle in her chest. That's the nicest thing anyone's ever said about me. When she returned to Blackmoor, Adrian was waiting at the gates. He'd ridden out to meet her carriage, and when she stepped down, he pulled her into an embrace that felt like coming home. "Did you save Thornbury?" he asked. "Thornbury saved itself. I just showed them how." Modest as always, truthful as always, Eleanor pulled back to look at him. "But Adrian, this is working. What we're building, it's spreading. Richard's going to teach other estates. Those estates will teach more. We're creating something that can't be stopped." "You're creating something that can't be stopped. I'm just trying to keep up." "Liar. You're the one who taught me that power means responsibility. And you're the one who taught me that responsibility means change." They rode back to Blackmoor together, and Eleanor felt the weight of 4 years settle into something like peace. Not perfect peace. Never that. But the peace of knowing you're doing work that matters. That night, at dinner in the great hall surrounded by estate managers and tenant representatives, a mixed gathering that would have been unthinkable 4 years ago, Eleanor made an announcement. "We're starting a training program," she said, "for any estate that wants to learn our methods. Young dukes like Richard, duchesses looking for alternatives to tradition. Anyone willing to put in the work." The room went quiet. "You're creating a school," Thomas said slowly. "I'm creating a movement. The Reform Act gave us legal framework. Now we give them practical knowledge. We show them it's possible to wield power responsibly, to serve instead of rule." Adrian leaned back in his chair, expression unreadable. Then he smiled. "How many estates are you planning to revolutionize?" "All of them. Eventually." "That's ambitious. That's necessary." The training program started small. 3 estates the first year, drawn by Eleanor's reputation and Richard's enthusiastic endorsement. She taught them everything: resource distribution, tenant relations, crisis management, leadership through service rather than authority. The second year, 10 more estates joined. The third year, 20. By the 5th year, Eleanor's methods were being studied across Europe. Agricultural ministers from France and Germany came to observe. Progressive aristocrats from across England made pilgrimages to Blackmoor to learn from the flame. And slowly, impossibly, the aristocratic landscape began to shift. Not everywhere. Not completely. There were still tyrant dukes and suffering tenants and estates where reform was seen as betrayal. But the conversation had changed. The possibility existed now, proof that power could be wielded differently, that tradition and progress weren't enemies. Eleanor was 32 when she received the letter that changed everything. It came from the Queen herself, requesting Eleanor's presence at court. Not as a society duchess, not as Adrian's wife, as an advisor on agricultural reform and aristocratic responsibility. Eleanor read the letter 3 times, then handed it to Adrian. "This is it," she said quietly. "Official recognition. The Queen herself acknowledging that what we're doing matters. Are you going? Are you coming with me?" Adrian smiled. "Always." The court appearance was everything Eleanor expected. Formal, stiff, full of people watching to see if the flame would burn the palace down. The Queen received them in a private audience, just Eleanor, Adrian, and Her Majesty. "Duchess of Blackmoor," the Queen said, "your reputation precedes you." "Does it, Your Majesty?" "They say you've revolutionized estate management. That you've proven progressive reform can coexist with traditional power structure. That you've saved the aristocracy from itself." Eleanor chose her words carefully. "I've proven that power wielded responsibly serves everyone, including those who hold it." "Diplomatic." The Queen's expression was unreadable. "The Prime Minister says you terrify half of Parliament." "I hope I terrify the half that needs terrifying." The Queen laughed. Actually laughed. A sound that seemed to surprise even her. "You're as bold as they say. Good. England needs bold women, especially now. Your Majesty, I'm establishing a Royal Commission on Agricultural Reform. I want you to lead it." The words hung in the air like a benediction. "Lead it?" Eleanor repeated. "Design policy, set standards, Create frameworks for how estates across England should operate. You've proven you can do it at the local level. I need you to do it nationally." Eleanor felt Adrian's hand find hers, grounding her. "That's an extraordinary amount of power, Your Majesty." "Yes. Can you wield it responsibly?" Eleanor thought about the London girl she'd been, terrified of losing herself. About the winter that had forged her. About the family saved and estates transformed and young dukes taught to lead instead of rule. "Yes," she said, "I can." The Queen smiled. "Then England is yours to reform. Don't disappoint me." The Royal Commission became Eleanor's life for the next 3 years. She traveled constantly, visiting estates across England, documenting conditions, designing policies that balanced traditional structure with progressive reform. She fought with conservative lords, negotiated with radical reformers, and built a framework that would reshape English agriculture for generations. It was exhausting, brutal. The hardest work she'd ever done, and she loved every minute of it. Adrian traveled with her when he could, managed Blackmoor when he couldn't, and never once suggested she slow down or step back. Their marriage had become exactly what Eleanor had feared it wouldn't be, a true partnership built on mutual respect and shared purpose. 10 years after that first winter in Yorkshire, Eleanor stood in Parliament again. Not as a guest, as the head of the Royal Commission, presenting final policy recommendations that would become law. The chamber was packed, every seat filled. Eleanor saw familiar faces. Richard of Thornbury, now a respected reformer in his own right. Thomas, who'd become her chief agricultural advisor. Mrs. Bramwell, who'd traveled to London specifically to watch. Her mother, still bewildered by what her daughter had become, but undeniably proud. And Adrian, sitting in the gallery, watching her with an expression that mixed love and awe and something like wonder. Eleanor presented for 2 hours, detailed every policy, justified every reform, answered every question with the kind of authoritative knowledge that came from actually doing the work. When she finished, the chamber was silent. Then someone started clapping. Thomas, standing in the public gallery. Then Richard. Then more voices, until the applause rolled through Parliament like thunder. The vote wasn't close. The Commission's recommendations passed with overwhelming support, becoming the foundation of England's agricultural policy for the next century. That night, Eleanor and Adrian returned to Blackmoor, the estate that had been her testing ground, her crucible, her home. They stood on the balcony where they'd fought and reconciled and built their future, looking out over fields that represented everything they'd achieved. "The girl who walked into winter," Adrian said quietly. "Look at her now. She's not a girl anymore. No, she's the woman who changed England." Eleanor leaned into him, feeling the solid warmth of his body, the steady beat of his heart. "We changed it together. You led. I followed. We partnered." Adrian turned her to face him, hands gentle on her shoulders. "Eleanor Blackmoor, the flame, the most dangerous, necessary, extraordinary woman I've ever known. I'm so grateful you chose me. I'm so grateful you were worth choosing." They kissed there in the darkness, and Eleanor felt the weight of 10 years settle into something like completion. Not ending. Her work would never really end, but achieving something significant enough to pause and acknowledge. "What's next?" Adrian asked. Eleanor smiled. "Everything. The policies need implementing. Estates need training. The next generation of reformers need teaching. We're not done. We're just getting started." "Of course we are. You've never known how to quit." "Why quit when there's so much left to burn?" 20 years after Eleanor became Duchess of Blackmoor, she stood in the same great hall where she'd first announced her revolutionary changes, surrounded by estate managers and tenant representatives from across England. The Blackmoor Training Institute, as it had officially become, was graduating its largest class yet. 30 young aristocrats, men and women, who'd spent a year learning to lead through service, who'd worked in fields, lived in tenant conditions, learned that power meant responsibility and privilege meant obligation. Eleanor looked at them, these young people who represented England's future, and felt something like hope. "You're going back to estates across this country," she told them. "Some of you will face resistance, families who don't want change, traditions that fight innovation, systems that seem impossible to fix." She paused, meeting eyes around the room. "Burn them down. Not literally, that would be arson. But metaphorically? Absolutely. Every unjust tradition, every cruel system, every structure that serves power instead of people, burn it down and build something better in the ashes. The flame speaks, someone murmured, and Eleanor smiled. The flame burns, that's what flames do. And you, she gestured to the graduates. You're all flames now. Go light England on fire. They cheered. These young revolutionaries, these children of aristocracy, who'd learned that their birthright came with responsibility. Eleanor watched them celebrate and felt the weight of 2 decades lift slightly. She'd done it. Not alone, never alone. But she'd proven that one woman, armed with courage and determination and the willingness to burn everything that needed burning, could change an entire country. That night, alone with Adrian in their private chambers, Eleanor felt her age for the first time. She was 43. Her hands bore scars from a dozen winters. Her hair was threaded with gray. Her body carried the weight of 2 decades of relentless work, and she'd never felt more alive. Tired? Adrian asked. He was 50 now, silver at his temples, still handsome but weathered by time and responsibility. Exhausted, but the good kind. There's that phrase again. It's still true. Eleanor moved into his arms, fitting against him the way she had for 20 years. We built something, Adrian. Something real and lasting. You built something. I just tried to keep up. Liar. You taught me that power could be wielded with compassion, that control and kindness weren't enemies. You made me believe change was possible. Adrian kissed her forehead. We made each other believe. That's what partnership means. They stood there in comfortable silence, 2 people who'd forged a love strong enough to survive winter and revolution and the weight of changing history. Do you ever regret it? Eleanor asked quietly, marrying the girl who refused to be decorative. Every day. Eleanor pulled back, startled. Adrian smiled. I regret that I didn't marry you sooner, that I wasted months watching you instead of talking to you, that I almost let fear and control cost me the best thing that ever happened to me. You're getting sentimental in your old age. I'm getting honest. There's a difference. Eleanor kissed him, tasting 20 years of partnership and promise and hard-won joy. I love you, she said. I love you too. My flame, my duchess, my partner in revolution. Outside, snow was beginning to fall. The first snow of another Yorkshire winter. But Eleanor wasn't afraid anymore. She'd learned long ago that winter was just another season, harsh but survivable, brutal but beautiful. And she'd learned that fire, real fire, the kind that burned in hearts and changed lives, could survive any winter, could survive everything. The woman who'd walked into winter had become the Duchess who set England on fire, and her legacy would burn for generations. Years later, when historians wrote about the great agricultural reform, about the transformation of England's estate system, the reduction in tenant mortality, the rise of responsible aristocratic power, they would trace it all back to one woman. Eleanor Blackmoor, the flame of Blackmoor, the Duchess who refused to be decorative, the girl from London who'd walked into Yorkshire winter and emerged as the woman who changed a nation. She never softened, never compromised her fire, never became the wife society expected. Instead, she became something far more dangerous. She became herself. And that was enough to transform the world.